Chapter 121. The old lady was too emotional. Lu Xiaoyi knew that this was not the time to talk, whether it was about Aunt Kai's death or the changes in his second uncle's family. He just held his mother's hand, and an imperceptible spiritual power flowed along her meridians. Just like he had done thousands of times before, he slowly calmed his mother's emotions. Under his intentional actions, the old lady no longer had the strength to speak and finally fell into a deep sleep. This time, she really fell asleep without any worries. Feeling that his mother's breathing had calmed down, Lu Xiaoyi gently retreated from the screen and nodded at the old doctor. The two of them went to the courtyard one after another. Sensing Lu Xiaoyi's doubts, the old doctor sighed. Kneeling under the scorching sun may seem like an excessive corporal punishment, but it is actually very harmful. When the sun shines, the blood and qi will surge, but they cannot move, so there is no place for the blood and qi to escape. When kneeling on the ground, the normal circulation of blood and qi will stop at the knees. Young people have a strong tolerance, and their bodies are flexible. They can always change their center of gravity slightly to avoid the numbness in their feet. However, the old people have slow reactions, and the two madams are stubborn and unwilling to move. They have not been able to walk for a long time, so I came too late for Madame Kai's death. When I saw her in the coffin, her face was bluish-black. It should be caused by the blood flowing backward into her brain. The old lady's injury is only on her feet. Because of the lack of blood flow for a long time, her meridians are not smooth, and her blood vessels are blocked. I have already used herbs, but the effect is not obvious. For this kind of illness, the best way is to find a martial arts master to massage her every day. Only then can there be a possibility of recovery. I am incompetent. I have been here for 20 days, and I can only prevent the blockage from worsening, but I can't completely remove it. I am ashamed. Lu Xiaoyi understood. Aunt Kai's death was caused by the blood and qi from kneeling under the scorching sun for a long time. It was similar to cerebral infarction and cerebral thrombosis in his previous life, because she had a basic illness. The reason his mother was able to survive was not because her body was stronger than Aunt Kai's, but because her body was weaker. Before the blood and qi surged, she had already fainted. It could be considered a blessing in disguise. The old physician excused himself. This old man's ability is limited, and I'm really not an expert in this field. I've already left behind a few prescriptions for blood circulation. You just need to find the prescription and get the medicine. Is there an experienced physician in Pooh City? If you don't, I have a name list here. They are all reputable doctors in the prefectures who are skilled in martial arts. I have also kept the name list for you. Actually, this kind of illness can also be treated by cultivators. I think they are more proficient in the area of meridians, but I have to remind you that you have to be careful when using cultivation pills. Spiritual pills for cultivation and poisonous herbs for mortals have to be specially controlled in terms of dosage. The old doctor left helplessly. Doctors were indeed powerless when it came to areas that they were not good at. At least, he dared to say that he was powerless. He had the heart of a doctor. Of course, Lu Xiaoyi wouldn't look for those doctors who knew how to massage. In this regard, he was the best expert. Not only did he have spiritual power, but he was also very familiar with his mother's physical condition. This was something that outsiders could never compare to. Taking advantage of the fact that his mother had yet to wake up, he presided over Lu Province's stewards' meeting for the first time. His purpose was to stabilize the morale of the army and calm the restlessness. Lu Province had not collapsed because it was originally an ordinary mansion supported by the reputation of the former Major Lu. Now that the new emperor had ascended the throne, he had merely shattered the protective layer that this reputation had brought to Lu Province. The impact might be far-reaching, and it would accelerate the decline of Lu Province. However, if Lu Xiaoyi himself did not care, then what could he do? Even if the new emperor had not appeared after his mother passed away, he would have left this place to pursue his own path of cultivation. Without descendants, it would be a decline sooner or later. Therefore, there was no difference. Simplification was his core policy. From his point of view, Lu Province was still a little too big. There were over 100 servants and only 3 masters. Now that there were only 2 left, there was no need to maintain such a grand display. It would attract unwanted attention, and it would be difficult for him. He did not need to discuss this with his mother. He was now the head of the household. He believed that once his mother's condition improved, she would agree with his decision. Lu Province should not continue to cling to the major's arrogance. That was all in the past. The first Lu Province meeting, led by the young master, ended successfully. This was just the surface. The real change came later. The housekeeper of the inner courtyard, Old Tu, and the housekeeper of the outer courtyard, Pingyan, were summoned to his study. Lu Xiaoyi revealed his true colors. There are 2 things that you can do as you please. Discuss it with each other. If there are any disputes, you can come to me. Don't trouble my mother. Her current situation is not suitable for her to worry about these things. First, within 3 years, I want the number of people in the household to be kept below 30. Apart from the people by my mother's side, everyone else will be eliminated. Especially me. Not a single person by my side will be left. Only the most loyal and most needed positions will be left. As for the others, they will be parted on good terms. Arrange a good path for them. Make sure the money is in place. Don't let people scold my Lu Province for being heartless. The 2 housekeepers were incomparably shocked. They did not know what was going on. Second, within 3 years, the manor outside the city will be adopted by the 2 of you. It will no longer belong to Lu Province. You will manage it yourselves. However, the precondition is that the annual tribute will not change. The manor will need to increase manpower and, as much as possible, transfer from the household. As for the servants in the household, apart from those by my mother's side, try to find good families for them. Their dowries must be generous. Don't let them suffer losses. Lu Xiaoyi's action, which was similar to making arrangements for his funeral, really shocked the 2 housekeepers. Pingyan couldn't help it. Pingyan could not help but tremble. Young master, you came back from Zhaoya. Could it be that the emperor will not let our Lu Province off so easily? Is he trying to kill us all? Lu Xiaoyi did not want to explain. If he told them the truth, they might not understand. If he could make them feel the pressure from Zhaoya, it would be more advantageous for them to carry out his arrangements. Not for the time being, but we still have to be prepared. Rather than being caught off guard and confiscated, it would be better for us to distribute the family business. If we let the emperor take advantage of us, it would be better for you to take advantage of it. Not only the manor outside the city, but also the shops in the city. In the future, they will all be given to my mother's people. This is the trend. You have to keep it in your heart and not ignore it. In the future, these things will all be yours. You have to treat them like your own family business. That's why I'll give you 3 years. Chapter 122. Under the reluctance of the 2 housekeepers, Lu Xiaoyi firmly pushed forward his reform, because he knew that the truth would be revealed in about 10 years, not because of the new emperor, but because of his reunion with his mother. With so many properties, if they were to divide them up at the last minute, they would suffer countless losses. It would be chaotic and disorderly. His mother was very good to the servants and was never willing to dismiss them easily. He had the obligation to maintain his mother's wishes and give them a way out that was not too bad. It was also so that he could leave without any burden. Cutting ties with the past was not as simple as walking away. He was not a playboy who could kill people on a snowy night by burning down a thatched cottage. He needed a plan. Fortunately, there was still time for the 2 servants to think things through. Also, if there are people who deliberately cause trouble during this process, try to trip you up, or do something bad, don't be weak and endure. I'll find some people for you. Just treat yourselves as local bullies and gangsters, and come to me if anything happens. After settling the external affairs, Lu Xiaoyi returned to his mother's bedroom. Now, he needed to rely on the skills he had painstakingly practiced for 4 years to help his only remaining relative in this world. For him, who was not an alchemist or physician, this was not easy, but he had no one to ask for help. Before dinner, his mother woke up. Seeing her son beside her, she was relieved. In this world, there was no such thing as the death of the emperor and the death of the emperor, but things were changing in this direction. She did not want revenge, but she was worried about her son. Cultivators always did things that mortals could not imagine. She did not want to put Lu Xiaoyi in danger because of them. In Night Emperor City, there were not only mortal armies, but also mysterious forces. During dinner, his mother's appetite improved. Under Lu Xiaoyi's arrangement, the screen in the bedroom was removed and the windows and doors were opened. The room was brightly lit and the air was fresh. After chatting with his mother for a while, he began to deal with the numbness in his mother's calf. His mother knew that he was cultivating, so she was not worried. In her heart, her son was the best, and there was nothing he could not solve. Lu Xiaoyi's method was very simple, and there wasn't anything special about it. It was just to inject a tiny bit of spiritual vigor into the calf and circulate it along the meridians. This was to find the blockage and then use it to break through and clear it. It sounded simple, and it wasn't hard to judge, but it was a real challenge. Because they had been delayed for a month, many parts of the meridians were completely blocked. There was no way to open them up. There were only two ways to open them up. One was to use force, and the other was to use medicine to remove the blockage. A violent impact was not advisable. Even a normal young person's meridians would not be able to withstand the impact of his spiritual power. He was only a qi-eating cultivator, not a zhuji cultivator. His control over the movement of his spiritual power was limited and not subtle enough. Because his spiritual power was in a gaseous state, its impact was far less powerful than that of a liquid state. He could only increase the amount. After increasing the amount, once it broke through, the remaining power would cause irreversible damage to the old man's meridians. In other words, the blockage had been opened, but the meridians had been broken. It was meaningless. He could only find medicine to remove the blockage. But what kind of medicine could have such miraculous power? Medicinal herbs from a mortal world obviously would not work, and he did not have much contact with medicinal pills from the cultivation world. He began to regret not buying more medicinal pills from Fenghuang Mountain. No one had foresight. As Lu Xiaoyi probed, he nervously weighed the pros and cons. Should he make another trip to Fenghuang Mountain and buy some medicinal pills that could help? But there was a very real problem. This kind of blockage would get worse with each passing day. Right now, with his incessant spiritual power cleansing, it could barely prevent the blockage from worsening. If he would go back and forth for more than half a month, he was afraid that even if he begged for an immortal pill, it would not be too late. 2 days later, Lu Xiaoyi made an important decision. After dinner, Lu Xiaoyi found a tall wooden bucket to soak his feet in. It was so high that it reached his knees. Lu Yaosher looked at him, her face full of distress. "Little E, is it very troublesome? Actually, if I can't walk, then so be it. At my age, there are plenty of people who can't walk. I'll just make a moving chair. With them pushing me, where can I go?" Lu Xiaoyi laughed. "It's not troublesome at all. Your son has plenty of ways. If this method doesn't work, I'll change to something else. If it really doesn't work, I'll go out and ask for help. In the cultivation world, this kind of problem is not a problem." He said it casually, but only he knew in his heart that this was really the last method he could think of. If this still did not work, he really did not know what to do. Perhaps the only way was to go to Fenghuang Mountain behind his mother's back and pay a high price to see if he could get a foundation establishment cultivator to help. This seemed to be the only feasible method. Lukewarm water was poured into the bucket. His mother took off her shoes and soaked in the water until it reached her knees. Lu Xiaoyi took out a jade bottle from his bosom and poured out a spinning bead from it. The bead was filled with brilliance and was surrounded by a dense mist. With one look, one could tell that it was an extraordinary item. There was also a strange fragrance that made one intoxicated. Lu Yaosher wanted to pull her feet out of the bucket. In her subconscious mind, such a precious item should not be used to soak one's feet. That would be blasphemous. However, Lu Xiaoyi pressed down with one hand, making her feet unable to move an inch. "Lily, what is this? Don't blaspheme a sacred item. There will be divine punishment. You will be blamed for not respecting the heavens. Mother won't soak it. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. "This is called a great treasure pill. To put it bluntly, it's the same as the great strength pills in Pu City. It's just that cultivators make it so that it overflows with brilliance. It's just to trick people and sell it at a high price. This kind of pill, your son can casually buy dozens of it. How can it be a sacred item? What divine punishment? I think you've read too many novels, haven't you? Lu Yaosher was skeptical. However, how could she know anything about cultivation? She could only believe whatever her son said and treat it as an ordinary great strength pill. Of course, this was not the great strength pill. In fact, Lu Xiaoyi only had this one pill. Furthermore, with his current net worth, even if he added up 1,500 spirit stones and other miscellaneous items together, he would not be able to buy half of this pill. In the cultivation world, this item had a famous name: Foundation Establishment Pill. The function of the Foundation Establishment Pill was, of course, the most important catalyst to help a cultivator transform qi into rain in their dantian. It was exceptionally precious. It was the pinnacle of melting and the saint of dissolving. These were all things that Lu Xiaoyi learned from the notes of the cultivator who was killed in Yao Manor. The reason why the Foundation Establishment Pill was precious was because of one of its main ingredients, the spring and autumn fruit. In theory, it could also be used on mortals. However, the dosage needed to be carefully controlled so that the medicinal strength would not be too strong and cause discomfort to the recipient. The Foundation Establishment Pill was very precious. It was so precious that even at the Myriad Cultivator Fair on Fenghuang Mountain, no sect or individual sold it. This was something that could almost determine a cultivator's future. It meant that the cultivator would have an extra 100 years of life, could fly freely in the sky, and could use magic at will. This was the threshold of the true Tao Foundation. How could it be described with the value of spirit stones? 5,000 low-grade spirit stones was the official price. In fact, there was a price, but no market. Even if you took out 10,000 spirit stones, there was no place to buy it. This was because these things were rare and had long been pre-ordered by cultivators from sects with backgrounds. They would not enter the circle of rogue cultivators. Liang Quanren's pill was snatched from someone he killed. However, in Lu Xiaoyi's heart, his mother was more important. He did not need to worry about choosing. Chapter 123. Pretending that it didn't matter, he threw the foundation-building Dan into the basin by his feet. This was also a key to bring out the medicinal efficacy. A holy medicine for cultivation, like the foundation-building Dan, was not like the 6-flavor Rehmannia pill, which could be broken into pieces and soaked in water to bring out its medicinal efficacy. It was a whole, so it had to exist as a whole in order to bring out its medicinal efficacy. What Lu Xiaoyi needed to control was nothing more than when the concentration of the foundation-building Dan was enough and the timing to fish it out. The building foundation pill was worthy of being a panacea. It didn't melt in the water, and there was no feeling of losing its efficacy. It was like a real bead, exuding a dense aura in the water. Lu Xiaoyi paid attention to the changes in the concentration of the medicine in the water, while continuing to use his spiritual power to ease the meridians on his mother's feet. "Mother, if you feel anything, you must tell me. Is it a tingling pain, an itch, or something else?" After 30 breaths, Lu Xiaoyi decisively took out the foundation-building pill. There wasn't even a trace of stickiness on the surface. He had no experience in soaking feet with the foundation-building pill, and he estimated that no cultivator in this world had such experience. Therefore, he could only feel the stone to cross the river. He couldn't wait for his mother to feel something before taking action. Otherwise, it would be too late. A foundation-building pill could let a cultivator be reborn, so its efficacy couldn't be underestimated. He soaked his hand in the water and secretly used his spiritual power to keep the water warm. He continued to use his spiritual power to gently stimulate his mother's meridians while observing her reaction. After an hour, he found that his mother didn't feel anything at all, so he soaked the foundation-building pill in the water again. After doing this 3 times and 4 hours later, his mother began to feel drowsy. Only then did he realize that the effect of the foundation-building pill couldn't be exerted without the stimulation of spiritual power. Therefore, he used his spiritual power to stimulate the foundation-building pill in the water. This time, the efficacy of the pill began to show significantly. His mother frowned drowsily and made a sound of surprise. Only then did Lu Xiaoyi quickly take out the foundation-building pill and ask, "Mother, how do you feel?" The old lady carefully thought about it. Xiaoyi, I feel a slight tingling sensation. Your vigorous pill is really useful. I can feel it even when soaking my feet." Lu Xiaoyi heaved a long sigh. It was good to feel something. After 3 days of trying, Lu Xiaoyi finally figured out the rules of how to use the foundation-building pill when soaking his mother's feet. Only then did he truly get on the right track with his mother's meridians. Lu Xiaoyi had completely given up on cultivating in the Gobi Desert. He only cultivated once in the morning to recover his spiritual power. For the rest of the time, out of the 24 hours a day, he would spend 12 hours soaking his feet in the water. 10 days later, there was a reaction when he tapped the tibia. 20 days later, the blocked meridians finally melted and opened up a small gap. Since then, spiritual power could pass through the gap. Whether or not he used a foundation establishment pill was only a matter of time. Lu Xiaoyi let out a long sigh of relief. Thankfully, he managed to melt the blockage before the foundation-building pill completely lost its effect. Otherwise, with his wealth, where would he find another foundation-building pill? He carefully placed the foundation-building pill into a jade bottle. This pill had done a great service, so it should still have some medicinal effect. Perhaps he could use it when he reached foundation establishment. Although he had used it to soak his mother's feet, how could his mother's feet be soaked in water? Lu Xiaoyi continued to work hard. Day and night, he did not stop. 2 months later, his mother's feet were completely healed. Although she still needed someone to help her walk, that was because her muscles had atrophied from not walking for too long. As long as she resumed exercising, walking by herself would be a matter of time. In the small garden, a servant girl supported Lu Xiaoyi. She slowly walked in front of Lu Xiaoyi, who was standing to the side. She reached out a hand and slid it across his still young face. She smiled with tears in her eyes. "Xiaoyi, from today onwards, you don't have to spend all your time in the inner residence. If you have time, just come and see me after breakfast. The rest of the time, you should be busy with your own things." Lu Xiaoyi finally had time to go to Aunt Kai's grave to pay his respects. This cemetery was actually located in a farm outside Lu Province. It had its back to the mountains and the water, and the scenery was beautiful. It was a location that the two old madams had long since set their sights on. He offered a sacrifice in front of the tombstone, cleaned it up, and pulled out the weeds. Lu Xiaoyi did not appear to be too sad. Aunt Kai had passed away at this age. In this world, she could be considered middle-aged. Lu Xiaoyi sat beside the grave, one hand wrapped around the tombstone. Just like when she was still alive, he only murmured softly, "Everyone will die one day. It's just a matter of time. Aunt Kai, you can go ahead and wait for Mother and I to come and accompany you." He wanted to carry his mother on his back to cultivate, but he also knew that this was ultimately a beautiful wish. Since ancient times, it had never been realized. Cultivation was originally going against the heavens and changing one's fate. He still wanted to carry his mother and children and have a big family. What he hoped to do was to not abandon this family in his mother's year of destiny. The days began to return to their usual rhythm. He, who had completely calmed down, set a strict cultivation schedule for himself. It was as if he had grown up overnight. He no longer had the indifferent attitude of cultivation from before. He placed his main cultivation base in the Gobi Desert. Every 3 days, he would return to the manor to see his mother. In the early morning, before the sun rose, he would cultivate in the gentle wind spirit gathering array. The array was fully activated, and he did not care about the consumption of spirit stones. He only cared about the speed of extracting the spirit essence of the world. In fact, during the chi-eater stage, as long as one's cultivation method was suitable, the environment was suitable, and one was willing to invest, reaching the final step before the foundation establishment stage was not a difficult matter. There had once been a genius disciple of a sect who reached the foundation establishment stage in 3 years. This was not something new. The difficulty of the foundation establishment stage was to take that final step. Without a foundation establishment pill, one would truly need time to grind. After grinding for dozens of years, one would sigh and sigh that the road was uneven, but one's fate was in the hands of the heavens. This was the true portrayal of a rogue cultivator. The concentration of spirit essence was different in different areas. There was no fixed rule, but generally speaking, the desolate areas outside the city were always better than the bustling areas inside the city. Because of the rejection of the mortal world, it was always weaker in places where a large number of mortals gathered. This was also the reason why Lu Xiaoyi had to choose the Gobi Desert. This place was desolate enough. There were no traces of humans. As long as one avoided a few limited trade routes and was further away from the areas where the red threadworms appeared, one would basically not be able to detect the presence of humans. If one added the enhancement of the gentle wind spirit gathering array, he felt that the concentration of spirit essence he absorbed could barely reach 3 times that of when he cultivated in Lu Province. This was already very impressive. At the end of the 5-hour period, it was time for him to start his own set of messy things. He brandished his sword 10,000 times. The 10 feet movement technique, the phosphorescence technique, and the art of object manipulation were all practiced according to his habits. For example, he would fly while controlling the flying dagger, or releasing the phosphorescence technique, or simply brandishing his sword like a madman. In the past, this might have just been a hobby. He liked to complete everything under speed and was not willing to just be a stump. But now he knew that he might have to use all of this. If he did not work hard, his little life would be in danger. Noon was the hottest time of the day. The sun was scorching, and it was not suitable for absorption, but it was very suitable for refining. At this time, he would reverse the Jade Purity Zhongping Imperial Edict. In the positive and negative circulation of the martial arts, he would force out the impurities in the spirit essence, leaving only the purest part. The afternoon was a copy of the morning. While running, he would do his best to squeeze out his potential in order to release all of the spirit energy in his body. Then, during the 5-hour period, he would absorb the spirit essence in the gentle wind spirit gathering array. Like a sponge, he would squeeze it dry, throw it into the lake, fill it with water, and squeeze it dry again. He would repeatedly seek to improve the quality and quantity of the spirit essence. After the 5-hour period, he would cultivate the awareness of his eyes and ears in the silence of the tortoise breath. Internally, he would cultivate the art of eyes and strengthen his ears to listen. Then, he would endlessly control objects and throw flying daggers. Chapter 124. His method was completely based on his own characteristics and preferences. In theory, it didn't have much advantage. In the eyes of the seniors in the sect, it would be considered as a reckless use of brute force. However, this method also had its own uniqueness, which was that it had a very strong lethality during movement. If it was combined with his unconstrained inspiration, it would also be very dangerous. However, his cultivation speed was also very ordinary. He didn't have the void-pierced stage calmness of an orthodox Taoist. He was cultivating the Jade Purity Zhongping's imperial decree in a slightly crooked manner. However, it wasn't a dafa, but a small change under the overall framework. There would be 10 results if 10 people cultivated the same cultivation method, because the entire process was uncontrollable. There were many factors such as resources, growing environment, state of mind, personality, and so on. Lu Xiaoyi's direction was the dafa of magic cultivation. He was leaning towards speed and strength. This already had the feeling of a body cultivator. However, this wasn't something he could choose. In order to protect himself, most rogue cultivators would lean towards physical strength because they didn't have enough magical techniques to rely on. They also didn't have enough resources to replenish talismans. This was why most rogue cultivators leaned towards physical strength, because this would allow them to survive. The upper echelons of Pu City had witnessed what had happened to the Lu residents. After waiting for a while, someone finally began to probe the situation. No matter what, this was still a piece of fat meat. There was a manor outside the city and a shop inside the city. Without the protection of Major Lu's reputation and the guidance of the new emperor, The Lu residence had lost its right to speak in the various levels of the government. There would also be no officials who would be biased, because this was the Lu residence's matter. Thus, some secret business disputes began to appear. This was the prelude to being devoured. If there was a start and the government was biased, the failure of the first lawsuit would be the trigger. Then, a group of sharks would come and bite the meat of Lu province clean. This was the first time Ping was dealing with such a thorny crisis. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't a ruthless person in the Jianghu, so he was very nervous. He didn't know what to do. If he really did, as the young master said, would it bring disaster to Lu province? You said that the Jin clan is the instigator? Lu Xiaoyi had just retreated from his mother's room when he was stopped by Ping Yin, who was burning with anger as soon as he left the inner residence. That's right. Young master is wise. The Jin family owns the most pawn shops in Pu City. They have a total of 7 pawn shops. This pawn shop in the northern part of the city is located in a better location. But in terms of strength and business, it is far inferior to the scale of the Jin family's pawn shop chain. It is already very difficult for them to break even. So, there's no possibility of them being a threat. The reason they gave was just the rules of the pawn shop. Everyone was doing it and had a tacit understanding. This time, when they reported us to the authorities, they deliberately sent someone to set up a trap. Our people at the counter were careless and got caught in the act. I've already hired a lawyer to prepare for this case, but the lawyer said that this case will be very difficult to win. The Jin family has already colluded with the Yamen, and our Lu province's name is no longer as useful as before. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. This was the kind of trouble he was afraid of. He couldn't be anxious or angry. It was all driven by profit. You couldn't really kill him, right? A lawsuit? How was that ahead? It was a bottomless pit. Even if you tried your best and won, after a few days, there would be people eyeing your grocery store, thick satin stall, bookstore, endless trouble, and you still want to go to court with them one by one? He had to nip this evil trend in the bud so that they wouldn't dare to make a move on Lu province easily. That was the right solution. Although he ordered Ping and the others to reduce the number of people in the residence, he didn't reduce the number of guards in the residence. Instead, he increased the number of guards in the residence. He found 10 soldiers who had practiced killing with him in the past. His purpose was to use them here. After thinking about it, he decided that it wasn't good to make a big fuss this time. After all, these 10 people were still ordinary people. Their hands and feet were tied in certain situations. They could only be used to guard Lu province. He still had to deal with the matters outside. Draw the locations of the Jin family's 7 pawn shops and give them to me. Don't worry about the rest. Guard the residence well, especially at night. Send more people. That night, 7 consecutive incidents of smashing occurred in Pu City. The 7 pawn shops were all owned by the Jin family. They were smashed from the inside to the outside, from top to bottom. Not even a chair was left intact. All the pawn shop items, precious porcelain and jade, wares were smashed into pieces. The calligraphy and paintings were torn into 2 halves. Not a single one was taken away. It was just a smashing. Of course, there were thugs in the pawn shop business. All of them were ruthless and merciless. However, none of these people could see the true face of the villains. Their hands and feet were dismembered and beaten up. Many porcelain and jade objects were smashed directly on their heads. The villains were simply crazy to the extreme. They were knocked out and done with it. The next day, when the sun had just risen, the bailiffs of Pu City were all dispatched. However, no matter how they investigated, they couldn't find anything. They only knew that there was only one person who did it. They smashed from the first half of the night to the second half of the night. The commotion was not small. However, no one could identify the appearance, voice, or trace of the crazy person. The head of the Jin family was so angry that his whole body trembled. He knew the root of all this. The only thing he didn't expect was that the dignified scholar Lu Sima's residence would act like a bandit. In the pawnshop business, they relied on liquid funds. The dead pawns were still fine, but the living pawns had to be redeemed within a time limit. Otherwise, they would have to pay back double. With so many bad debts, even if he sold himself, how could he afford to pay them back? He had to sue. He had to sue, even if he had to go bankrupt. He had to push the blame to Lu province. Otherwise, his life's work would go down the drain, and there would be no possibility of recovery. In a tea house, Lu Xiaoyi was drinking tea with Hu Yong. Hu Yong smiled bitterly. "Young master, this is not the method of a cultivator of my generation." Lu Xiaoyi was disdainful. "I've worked so hard to cultivate. Could it be that I've cultivated so hard just to let people walk all over me and shit all over me? Brother Hu, you know very well that I didn't choose to simply kill because of my status as a cultivator. I went overboard this time for the sake of peace in Pu City in the future. There won't be so many people who don't know when to stop treating Lu Province as their cash cow. Once and for all, it's better than always bothering Brother Hu." Hu Yong sighed. This young master of Lu Province was becoming more and more unfathomable. The last time he saw him, he was still at the mid-stage of qi eating. Now his aura was so strong that it was already at the late stage. Hu Yong even suspected that monk Qing Mu was killed by this young master, and that there wasn't another expert in the residence. Otherwise, it wouldn't explain why Lu Province's second madam had knelt to death. However, he owed this young master a huge favor. Furthermore, the Jin family was merely a wealthy family. They weren't considered to be reputable in Pu City, and they didn't have any direct relations with the government. This made things a lot easier. Cultivators didn't like to owe others favors, so Hu Yong wanted to use this opportunity to settle the karma between them. "If that's the case, leave the rest to me. Young master, don't interfere and make things difficult for me." Chapter 125. Everyone in Pu City paid close attention to the Jin family's case because it could herald the start of a grand banquet. Many wealthy families who were quick on their feet had set their sights on the other businesses in Lu Province and made preparations in advance. Once the Jin family won, everyone would swarm in. This was the cruelty of the mortal world. It took many years to establish a family, but only one reason was needed to topple a family. Not many people were merciful. This was the law of survival in the upper class. "Who asked you, Major Lu, to be so bold as to make Prince Lai re-kneel before you? Who asked you, young Master Lu, to be disdainful of fame and idleness all day long? Who asked you, the Lu family, to have integrity and not be willing to lower your head in the capital? You didn't have the ability, but you insisted on showing off your family's prestige. This was the consequence. 7 pawnshops were smashed and lost a lot of money. Such a vicious case had not happened in Pu City for a long time. Although it was fortunate that no lives were lost, Lord Qin still decided to personally try the case to show that he valued it. After the Yaman's all-out pursuit, the cooperation of many departments, the officials' round-the-clock interrogation, and Lord Qin's careful deduction, they finally came to a conclusion during the trial. The truth was as follows. During their pawnshop career, Master Jin and his son had colluded with the bandit Redbeard for a long time. They wantonly threatened, robbed, and plundered the wealth of the common people. As long as the family heirloom was exposed in the pawnshops, it was inevitable that the Jin family would get their hands on it sooner or later. After a long period of cooperation, hostility grew between the two sides. In the end, due to the unequal distribution of the loot, Redbeard became angry and smashed things to vent his anger. He smashed the 7 pawnshops of the Jin family in one night. He was extremely arrogant. After the unremitting efforts of hundreds of Yaman runners in Pu City, Redbeard was arrested a few days ago. However, because he resisted the Yaman, he was seriously injured and died a few days ago. There was a coroner's report as evidence. As gentry, Master Jin and his son didn't think of serving the country and sympathizing with the common people. They were evil on the inside and had committed numerous crimes. In their decades of work, many innocent people had lost their family fortune and their families were broken up. They should be severely punished, otherwise it wouldn't be enough to show the prestige of the new dynasty. With the order, Master Jin and his son were immediately locked up in prison and would be executed after the report was sent to the Yaman. His wife and concubine's family members were dismissed and returned. Their family property and shops were all sold to compensate for the loss of those items that were smashed. This was the final judgment, and no appeal was allowed. This verdict truly shocked countless people in Pooh City. The Jean family, the first to eat the crab, was killed by the crab instead. This made everyone who wanted to make a move subconsciously retract their hands. They were afraid that if they were too slow, they would be caught by the crabs again. Someone with a discerning eye, who was actually Zhuge Liang with hindsight, shook his head and analyzed. The truth could only be 2 points. First of all, the new emperor's revenge was only to vent his anger from when he was young. He did not really want to destroy the Lu family. Otherwise, why would the second madam of Lu province die, while the main wife, Lu Yaoshi, was completely fine and alive? That so-called second madam was just a concubine servant girl. Since the imperial court let her go, it meant that they didn't care about this kind of substitution. Second of all, Lu Yaoshi's maternal family did not fall during the incident at Zhaoye a few months ago. In any case, it was still a general's household. With this kind of background, how could they be bullied by a normal merchant? They were all discerning people. No one thought that Lu province was innocent in this incident. But the strange thing was that no one thought that the Jean family had been wronged. In this world, no one was clean. As long as they ate grains, there would definitely be feces under their buttocks. If they investigated, they would definitely be guilty. If they didn't investigate, then everyone would live happily together. From a legal point of view, this verdict was not abrupt at all. There was no such person as Redbeard. Of course there was. The Jean family and Redbeard did not collude. Of course they were colluding. It was just that the degree of collusion had not reached the point where the entire family would be sent to prison. Normally, everyone would be happy, and Redbeard would even be able to have a drink with the bailiff. But once the reverse scale of the government was touched, this drink was nothing. The Jean family did not make a big mistake. The only mistake they made was that they chose the wrong target. It was that simple. The upper-class society was not always peaceful. Once there was a disturbance, the loser would usually end up in a miserable state. However, it was so miserable that they might even lose their lives. This was very rare in Pooh City. This also meant that Lu province still had an invisible power that made people respect them. A few days later, because the prisoners in the prison fought over food, the Jean father and son, who were newcomers, became the target of a group of people and were beaten to death. At this point, all of the upper-class families in Pooh City regarded Lu province as a tiger. They did not dare to have the slightest bit of suspicion. Even the streets where Lu province was located were strictly forbidden for their children to wander around, afraid that they would cause trouble. Lu Xiaoyi listened to Ping An's exultant narration and sighed in his heart. This Hu Yong looked kind and reasonable, and had the demeanor of a gentleman. However, he was someone from the mysterious government office. When he really made a move, he was really ruthless and ruthless. He wanted to eliminate the source of trouble. He could understand Hu Yong's actions. Since he was going to do it, he had to do it cleanly. If he left a tail, the Jean family would complain to the emperor. If they met someone who did not get along with Lord Qin, it would immediately cause a lot of trouble. Therefore, Hu Yong did this out of responsibility to his boss. A few years ago, Lord Qin wanted to make a contribution to Lu province. However, the situation was very different now. Firstly, his backer in Zhaoye City had fallen. Secondly, the new emperor had already vented his anger on Lu province. If he continued to add insult to injury, it would be like drawing legs on a snake. He might even cause trouble for himself. Therefore, this time, he let Hu Yong do it. He could make clouds and rain with a flip of his hand. The power of the government was undoubtedly displayed here. Many people learned their lesson from this change. Lu Xiaoyi also understood that Hu Yong did it so cleanly this time to tell him that the matter of killing Qing Mu and gifting him the loot was over. If he encountered any trouble in the future, he would talk about it again. It was a very heartless way of doing things, but it was the most common way of doing things among cultivators. He appreciated this very much. As for the Jean family, he did not have much sympathy for them, let alone pity them. If Lu province was in trouble, who would pity them? The Jean family had made their own choice, so they could not blame anyone. At this point, the situation of Lu province and Pooh City had entered a rhythm that Lu Xiaoyi wanted to see the most. They were alone in the city. No one dared to offend them, but no one would get close to them. This was a good thing for him, who was focused on cultivation. For his mother, who was recuperating quietly and stood aloof from worldly affairs, it would also save her a lot of unnecessary social interactions. It was perfect. Chapter 126. He was completely immersed in his own world of cultivation, polishing his claws and teeth alone. Since the cultivation of spells in the chi-eating stage was not the main direction of fighting, then he would do his best to make up for it in other aspects. It was ridiculous that a person who wholeheartedly wanted to become a Dharma cultivator was waving his sword every day, controlling the flying daggers to attack randomly. But this was the reality. At least he could comfort himself with this. What he was practicing now, even if he reached the foundation establishment stage one day, it would still be useful, right? A real cultivator should be proficient in both long-range and long-range attacks. Since long-range attacks could only be learned after the foundation establishment stage, it was also a very wise move to practice close combat first. In the past 5 years, when he waved his sword, he experienced the sword aura, and sword chi. Now, he was slowly converging and returning to normal. This was a different performance stage when the spiritual power was fully compressed and entered the long sword. It meant that his attainment in the sword was improving at a terrifying speed. But he could not feel this. He had no fellow disciples, no friends, and no one could cultivate together. Under the situation of comparing with each other, he did not know how terrifying his growth was. It was completely beyond the scope of normal cultivators' understanding. If he was in a sect and had countless fellow disciples as a foil, he would know that a cultivator who had been waving his sword for several years would be ecstatic after seeing his sword aura. A cultivator who had been waving his sword for dozens of years would be drunk, because he could produce sword aura. But he, after waving his sword for less than 5 or 6 years, even his sword aura was gradually converging. This talent could no longer be simply described as terrifying. There must be a deeper reason, but in Lu Xiaoyi's opinion, this was very normal, right? Is everyone like this? Am I too slow in my cultivation? Can I be faster? Even if we don't want to be the best, we can't be at the bottom, right? In the few times he had seen other cultivators fight, it seemed that the aura on their weapons was converging. He had just caught up with them. He still needed to work hard. This was a misunderstanding. When others were waving their weapons, they did not see aura. This could be because they had reached the perfection stage, but more likely, the aura had not been produced yet. The same progress was reflected in his object control technique. Even without the guidance of his divine sense, he could make the 9 flying daggers fly around his body with only his spiritual power. Moreover, this was under the condition of the full speed of the 10 feet movement technique. The distance, penetrating power, and speed were completely different from when he first started practicing. He could completely nail a throwing knife into a rock within 100 feet, and he could even use the 9 throwing knives to play tricks. This was a huge improvement. He finally had some semblance of being a cultivator. He wouldn't have to pick up his throwing knives all over the ground after fighting for so long. Compared to his progress in swordsmanship, his achievements in spells were lackluster. Spirit Fire Spell and Phosphorescent Spell, the 2 main spells that he had been practicing, were not effective at all. The casting time did not decrease by much, and the power of the spells did not increase by much. If he was in a sect, his master would not hesitate to send him to practice body cultivation or something else. However, he was cultivating alone, and he felt that his talent in spells was quite good. Cultivators who consume chi are not suitable to practice spells, are they? Since it was a common trait, wouldn't it be normal for him to learn it slower? Some people are suitable for a fast start, and some people are good at later stages. He, Lu Xiaoyi, might belong to the kind of people who are good at later stages. Ants are not creatures of the mud, and they turn into insects when they encounter wind and rain. When he reaches foundation establishment, who can say who is strong and who is weak? When the time comes, with his still passable close combat skills and powerful long-range spells, he could be free and unfettered for the rest of his life, right? This was Lu Xiaoyi's evaluation of his own abilities and his future plans. What he didn't know was that it was all a mess. In the market square of Phoenix Mountain, the cultivator from Life, Leaving Heaven, had suggested that he buy a 5-element compass to roughly determine the attributes of his 5 elements. After he came back, he was delayed for a few months because of the great changes in his family. Only when everything was normal did he test himself. The answer was a little unexpected. His 5 elements were actually the rarer metal element. Rare is rare. Rare is precious. And precious means that he has a bright future. In any case, this was how he understood the 5 elements. What else could he do? He couldn't dislike his own body. The metal element was a little awkward in the chi-eating stage, because among the 5 elements, the easiest ones for chi-eating cultivators to use were fire, water, wood, earth, and metal. The activation of the metal element required the cultivator's spiritual power to be very strong. Of course, it was also the most destructive. It was not that Lu Xiaoyi did not have gold elemental spells. In the past 5 years, he would go to the depths of the Gobi Desert to catch red thread worms every year. Then, he would go to Phoenix Mountain to exchange them for spirit stones. Because he knew that his natal attribute was gold elemental, he also bought 2 gold elemental spells for the Chi Eater stage in high spirits. Prickles, Molten Metal Magic Shield. Unfortunately, metal element spells required the cultivator's spiritual power to be very strong. He had never successfully used the Molten Metal Magic Shield. No matter how long he held it, even if his dantian was empty, it was useless. He was able to use prickles, but the effect made him speechless. Due to the strength of his spiritual energy, the prickles had turned into burrs. It was like being nailed by a barb on a blade of grass. It was meaningless. He finally understood that there was also a gap in the nature of objects and magic. The reason why everyone liked to use fire magic was because fire didn't have a fixed form, or you could think of it as a gaseous state, which made it easier to understand. Next was water element. Because it was a liquid, it was more difficult to simulate it with spells. Then there was wood, earth, and metal, which were solid. The higher the density, the harder it was to simulate, because the spiritual power couldn't support it. Ordinary people who realized this might be disappointed in their own talent for spells, but Lu Xiaoyi was different. He saw that he was different from the others. When he reached the foundation building stage and mastered the most difficult metal element spells, wouldn't he be able to suppress the 5 elements with 1 gold? He had an unreasonable confidence in his own talent for spells. He didn't know where it came from, but it was deeply ingrained and couldn't be changed. It was as if Tao cultivation was Tao cultivation, and everything else didn't exist. He didn't realize this point at all. 90% of Tao cultivators were Tao cultivation, so it didn't seem wrong to think this way. At this time of the year, according to the usual practice, he should have gone to the depths of the Gobi Desert to catch red thread worms, but he didn't. The reason was simple. The secret of the dolphin thread incense had been discovered. It wasn't from him. In this regard, he had always been very cautious and careful, and he wasn't greedy. However, in the cultivation world, even rogue cultivators were a group of the smartest and most adventurous fellows. When the dolphin thread incense became popular in the north and south of the Yangtze River, this was an inevitable result. Whether it was intentional or not, the fact that the dolphin thread incense could attract red thread worms could no longer be hidden. Chapter 127. Lu Xiaoyi had discovered this situation 2 years ago, but the news had not yet spread. There were not many people, so he could still make some gains. However, the large number of red thread worms caught by the puffer thread incense had caused a catastrophic reduction in the number of red thread worms in the core area of the Gobi Desert. The others were not like him, who could not wait to catch as many as he wanted. They did not care about the seasons or whether they would run out of resources. Therefore, Lu Xiaoyi went in last year and used a lot of puffer thread incense, but he only caught 100 or 200 red thread worms. Such a change made him realize that this precious land would not be of any help to him in the future. Fortunately, he had some resources before. The vague memories of his previous life gave him a very persistent awareness of protecting the environment and creatures. Therefore, he never caught indiscriminately. After using the puffer thread incense, he would definitely send these little worms back to the Gobi Desert. However, there were still too few people with this awareness, especially under the premise that everyone was fighting for it. He did not go to the core area this year because he knew that the news should spread. In the future, even the ordinary white sandworms might not be able to survive in the Gobi Desert, let alone the red threadworms. Once the value of these species was discovered by humans, there would be no other outcome other than extinction. Even the relatively remote place he was staying in had lost its former tranquility. From time to time, there would be cultivators coming over to touch and fiddle with the ground. He had no reason to stop them, and this was not his private territory. He had eaten his fill, so he went to restrict others from eating. This was not the way of cultivation. In other words, he did not have the ability to set his own path in the Gobi Desert. Therefore, he moved his cultivation ground back to the Earth Cliff Cave. After all, at the edge of the Gobi Desert, there would be fewer people looking for worms. Everyone's first target was still the red threadworms. This was a rational move. This year, there were an unusually large number of rogue cultivators in the Gobi Desert. Everyone swarmed into the core area of the Gobi Desert, using the relatively cheap puffer thread incense to exchange for the precious red threadworms. Excessive catching had begun to spread. There were no sects nearby to declare sovereignty, and there was no ban period. When there were more people, there were fewer resources. Under the scorching sun, conflicts were inevitable. From individual confrontations to conflicts between different countries, different regions, and different interest groups. Although Lu Xiaoyi was far away and couldn't feel the fluctuations of spiritual aura, he could occasionally see cultivators fleeing in panic. In the seemingly peaceful cultivation world, when interests could not be reconciled, it would immediately become bloody. Lu Xiaoyi didn't know if he was one of the people who had just learned the news. Would he also go to the fire to get chestnuts? It shouldn't be idle, because ever since he stepped into this circle for nearly 10 years, he hadn't found a way to obtain resources that was worth doing for a long time. If he had to count, maybe robbery was one of them? To Lu Xiaoyi's surprise, the situation was worsening. Just from this direction, he saw several injured cultivators fleeing. One of them even met him and politely asked which state and prefecture he was in. Lu Xiaoyi also knew the general process of their conflict. Because he could not sense the participation of cultivators of higher levels, such as the Foundation establishment, this large-scale confrontation was basically a fight between rogue cultivators, and it was developing into an alliance. Several large regional groups began to reach an agreement and join forces to drive away the rogue cultivators and rogue cultivators. The power of an organization was gradually revealed in this chaos. They wanted to dominate the Gobi Desert. At the very least, they had to completely control the core area of the Gobi Desert, which was also the most important area where red threadworms were produced. For an individual, it was difficult to resist. Everyone was in the cheater stage, and there was no essential difference in their combat power. Therefore, the party with the advantage in numbers was basically the party that controlled the situation. This injured cultivator was a lone traveler who had been ostracized. There were many like him in the central area. After being scattered, they could only flee in all directions and had no choice but to leave the area where the red threadworms were produced. For late-stage chi-eating cultivators like them, ordinary white sandworms were meaningless. The world of rogue cultivators was actually no different from that of mortals. At least at their level, there was not much difference. Lu Xiaoyi sighed in his heart. There was nothing he could do about it. For him, it was good enough that he could take care of himself. Other people's affairs were too far away from him, so far that he couldn't reach them even if he stretched out his hand. But trouble was like this. When you wanted to avoid it, it would pester you like a ghost. Even if he didn't go to the central area, didn't cultivate in that remote place, and didn't want to get involved in these disputes, it would still find him like a shadow. This afternoon, he was going against the flow on the earth cliff. He didn't hide, because even if he hid in the caves, the changes in the spiritual vigor in the sky couldn't be hidden from people passing by. Therefore, it was better to sit on the earth cliff and cultivate in the Dafa. At least he could find people approaching from farther distance. Other people liked quiet and cool cultivation, but he liked the heat. He liked the feeling of physical exhaustion with sweat on his face, the feeling of being calcined in an oven. This was not a physical affection, but a psychological closeness. Therefore, he found two cultivators riding a desert camel at the first moment. It was not because he could feel the breath of cultivators, but because from this direction, they couldn't be ordinary mortals. This was not the direction of the trade route, and there were few water sources. The desert camel ran unhurriedly. Obviously, it was different from the lone travelers who were being chased. Lu Xiaoyi slowly stopped his cultivation, but still maintained the posture of cultivation to deal with possible troubles. The two strangers obviously didn't have any special intention. They saw that the soil of the Gobi began to plate. There was more and more soil and less sand. They knew that this place was close to the edge of the Gobi. Then they saw the relatively high earth cliff and a person sitting on it. Under the scorching sun, those who could sit here and bask in the sun were either lunatics or cultivators. The two hesitated for a moment, and then rode their desert camels to find him. They ran to the bottom of the earth cliff and looked at the person who was still sitting there motionlessly. One of them said, "The Red Line Alliance of the Gobi is temporarily seizing this area. My friend, you'd better not stay here for long, or we'll be in trouble." These words were very polite, but the meaning behind them was aggressive. Lu Xiaoyi was very puzzled. Seizing? Do you have the authorization of the imperial court of the Yi Kingdom? Give a seal? Send a letter everywhere? If not, as far as I know, Zhaoye is not a cultivation country. The land and rivers are all owned by the country. Since when can cultivators divide their land and claim a certain area as their own? The cultivator frowned. Sure enough, there were no good people among the rogue cultivators. As long as their interests were threatened, they would immediately refuse. Since we're cultivators, we shouldn't talk about the mortal world. We control this area and only control the entry and exit of cultivators. Mortals are not forbidden. Little brother, when you're outside, don't be infected with the bad habits of rogue cultivators. When it's time to give in, you have to give in. Otherwise, don't blame us for not warning you in advance when you suffer losses. Chapter 128. Lu Xiaoyi suppressed his anger. When you retreated again and again, the other party still wouldn't let you go. Even a clay figurine couldn't resign itself to adversity. Just like so many injured cultivators who had been driven away, how could they not know when to back down? But the world was so big. How much power did rogue cultivators have? They could only pick up scraps of meat from the leftover parts of the sect to eat. It wasn't that they didn't know how to back down, but that there wasn't much room to back down in the first place. It wasn't easy to find a place where the sect couldn't be bothered to take action. Without a powerful foundation establishment cultivator to control the situation, they were still being bullied by a rogue cultivator gang. Who could tolerate this? We're all from the same root, so why are you in such a rush to kill each other? You call yourselves the Red Line Alliance, so you want to dominate the Gobi Desert. If you call yourself the Green Alliance, does that mean you'll be in charge of all the places with plants? If you call yourself the Sunlight Alliance, does that mean all the places the sun shines on will be yours? Firstly, I didn't dig for worms, and secondly, I didn't delay your plans. But you forced me to the edge of the Gobi Desert to struggle for survival, all for the sake of this spiritual opportunity that's even more unruly than a city. Even so, you still can't tolerate this? If I don't leave, what are you going to do about it? Lu Xiaoyi also knew that his current mood wasn't right. Since he'd already retreated to this point, why not take another step back? It wasn't like it involved life, death, or the future. But at his age, although his temperament was usually calm, he was still a young man in the end. His tone would always be different from that of an old man. His previous retreat was for survival. His current refusal to retreat was also for survival. A person couldn't always retreat. There had to be a bottom line, or else what difference was there between him and a salted fish? What was the point of cultivating? Wasn't it better to return to Lu province, get married, have children, and live a simple life? Moreover, There was also a trace of venting after the tragedy that befell his sect. The cultivator raised his hand, and a talisman flipped over in his hand. You refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. If you don't suffer a bit, I'm afraid you'll. Before he could finish speaking, a black shadow had already descended in front of him. His companion beside him pulled on the reins and dodged to the side. Old Huang, be careful. Old Huang was also a veteran rogue cultivator. When he saw that the other party was using the cliff's height to dive straight down, he knew that even if he threw the talisman in his hand now, it wouldn't be able to stop the other party's fall. He knew that his talisman could injure people, but it couldn't kill them. Instead of throwing it out now and injuring the other party, but not being able to stop the other party's fall, he might as well save this talisman to stop the other party's fall first. Rogue cultivators, with limited resources, not only did they have to consider how to fight reasonably, they also had to consider how to reduce their consumption. Everyone knew that throwing out 10 talismans at once would definitely be effective, but what would happen after that? Don't you want to live anymore? There were many choices in front of him. He could leap left and right, or he could abandon his camel and retreat. But when he saw that his opponent was charging at him fiercely, he chose the most dangerous and possibly the most vicious move. With a pull of the reins, the huge body of the camel stood up like a human. Then, he crashed into the figure that was pouncing towards him. His companion beside him was convinced. Old Huang's mouth was a little foul, but ordinary rogue cultivators wouldn't have the guts to do this. However, no matter how the other party reacted to this collision, whether it was a direct collision, a roll on the ground, or a weapon slash, there would be an instant loophole because of the camel's influence. Next, whether it was a weapon or a talisman, the initiative was on his side. In his eyes, the young man had chosen to slash with a long sword. This was also the most foolish way to do it. Even with the ability of a rogue cultivator, he could at most kill the camel with a single sword strike. He might not be able to cut off the camel's strong and thick neck. Next, he would just have to wait for their counterattack. In the blink of an eye, the sky was filled with blood. The camel fell to the ground with a thud. The powerful impact caused the camel's body to lean back. Old Huang also fell with the camel. He was shocked to find that the ordinary sword strike had actually cut off the camel's neck. At the same time, it had also split Old Huang, who was hiding behind the camel's neck, into two. Was it a divine weapon? Or was it a blade with sword intent? What was even more chilling was that after killing someone, Tao Ran stood with his back facing him. His body swayed gently, as if he was enjoying himself, as if he was drinking a cup of immortal wine. Of course, he would never have guessed that this was because he was scared of blood. After the young man finished enjoying himself, he turned his head and smiled at him. Then he dived down. Yeah, the rogue cultivator shouted. He abandoned the camel and soared into the air, running towards the depths of the desert. At this moment, his courage was shattered. How could he have the slightest bit of fighting spirit? He had to abandon the camel because in the desert, camels relied on their long strength. Compared to a rogue cultivator, their speed was not enough. Therefore, escaping was more important. He had to focus on escape techniques. The distance between them wasn't far. It was only about 100 feet. Since his opponent had started first, he had to do his best. Fortunately, for Chi-Eater cultivators, casting spells, throwing talismans, and controlling objects to smash people didn't exist at all. This made the distance of 100 feet very precious. His escape technique was also very good. In fact, which rogue cultivator wasn't like this? The best escape technique among all techniques. This was the motto of every rogue cultivator. Before he could run 10 steps, he felt his back tighten as a sharp object pierced through his chest. Following that, another sharp object circled around his neck. He felt no pain at all as he flew up into the air. The young man immediately stopped. He closed his eyes slightly and his body swayed. He took a deep breath, as if he was enjoying the smell of blood in the air. He's a devil. This was the rogue cultivator's last thought. Seems like it's very simple. Lu Xiaoyi recovered from the slight dizziness. I haven't even started to use my best technique. He neatly packed up the two people's belongings. He didn't have to worry about someone digging a hole for him. These people were just a motley crew that had gathered at the last minute. If they weren't a real organization with discipline, who would be willing to leave a mark on others? This wave of bug catchers was very weak. This was Lu Xiaoyi's conclusion. He didn't even use his best trump card, the phosphorescence technique. He only used a few moves to get close to his opponent. This made him feel a little proud. Should he return to Pooh City or continue to stay here to cultivate? He decided to stay. He had only heard of those who ran away after losing a battle. He had never heard of those who ran away after winning a battle. In fact, in his mind, he was still thinking about continuing to hone his skills. Why not? Only real combat could force out a person's full combat potential. This principle wasn't difficult to understand. Moreover, in the Gobi Desert, there was no problem of ambushes. If there were too many of them, all he had to do was run. After running for close to 10 years, he finally had the chance to prove whether there was value in being a mobile spiritual cultivator fort. Two poor people. Looking at their belongings, Lu Xiaoyi shook his head and sighed. One of them didn't even have a storage ring. He only had a few storage bags to make up the numbers. However, he wouldn't feel guilty about this. Whether he should kill or not had nothing to do with the rich or poor. It only had to do with what you did. What did I do in my previous life? I was a loser. I don't have any impression of anything else. Apart from everything about himself, he was very clear about everything else about his previous life. This kind of transmigration method was really strange. Could be caused by that floating piece of luck in his sea of consciousness. It didn't seem like it. When his soul was drifting in the universe, he could no longer remember anything about his previous life. Could it be that he was a butcher? A mercenary? Otherwise, how could he be so used to killing and not have any ripples in his heart? Lu Xiaoyi sighed about his pitiful past as he climbed up the cliff and continued his refinement. Chapter 129. P.S. It will be released on August 1st. On the day of release, 3,000 initial subscriptions plus 20 chapters, 5,000 initial subscriptions plus 30 chapters, 10,000 initial subscriptions plus 100 chapters. This is impossible. After the monthly votes exceed 2,000, every 500 subscriptions will add one chapter. Come on, the initial subscriptions won't cost much. Let's build up the momentum first. More than 10 days passed peacefully, but no one came to find trouble with him. He finally understood. After all, they were not from an organized sect. Who would care if one or two of them didn't come back? They might even be secretly happy that they had lost 2 more locusts. The lives of rogue cultivators were worthless because there were very few people who truly cared about them. He returned to his normal state of cultivation. In his opinion, a group of rogue cultivators from all over the world couldn't cause much trouble. It was just a problem of how to distribute resources. This so-called Red Line Alliance wouldn't last long and would fall apart under the uneven distribution of benefits. A good orthodoxy that had been passed down for a long time would definitely have many people in the sect who were willing to contribute. Because there was no absolute equality, there would need to be people who would make concessions. When concessions became a tradition of a power, it would be impossible for that power to not become strong. This view of his came from the philosophy of life in his previous life. It was the truth. But before the truth could show its value, it was often wrong. In the long run, there was no problem with this philosophy, and the Red Line Alliance would definitely fall apart. But in the short run, it still had vitality. The problem was he was still in this short window of time. On this day, Lu Xiaoyi returned from Pooh City in a bad mood. His mother was a little sick. It was an ordinary fever and cold. But when he channeled his spiritual power, he found that the problem wasn't the cold, but the body's constitution. His mother was almost 60 years old. In this short-lived world, her lifespan was already longer than most people. But in his heart, there was no limit to her lifespan. What made him depressed was that he had been channeling his spiritual power for 10 years, and it had obviously extended his mother's lifespan. So much so that it was basically useless for him to continue channeling his spiritual power. Even mortals had spiritual resistance. There was no doubt that the kneeling, scorching sun had affected his mother's body. It was just that it was hidden in the passage of time and slowly revealed itself. No one could say for sure how many years of her lifespan it had affected. He didn't have many solutions now. The only feasible thing was to build his foundation as soon as possible. By then, his understanding of cultivation, nature, and the human body would improve. Perhaps he would find a better solution. If it weren't for this, he wouldn't have come to the Gobi to cultivate. He would have stayed at home to accompany his mother. He was a little absent-minded, but when he was about to approach the cliff, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. The place where the two cultivators were buried had been turned over. Before he could react, two camel riders appeared behind the sand, dune in front of him. Soon after, 8 more cultivators appeared, one after another, from the side and behind them. He had been surrounded. How could this be? In fact, the reason was very simple. It was because he returned to Pooh City every 3 days, especially this time. He had been delayed for a few days because of his mother's illness, so he had been blocked by the cultivators of the Red Line Alliance. This was both coincidental and inevitable. If he continued to take things for granted and carelessly mingle in the cultivation world, this kind of situation would happen more often. He was just passing by. The other party couldn't directly determine that he was the murderer. If he pretended to be ignorant, there was still a chance for him to stir up trouble. But Lu Xiaoyi intuitively felt that he couldn't do this and put the initiative in someone else's hands. Being surrounded, being flattened, or rounded was all up to others to decide. It was just like the government in Pooh City. But if you were in their hands, everything was out of your control, regardless of whether you did it or not. For cultivators, this was even more lawless. Even if it was just to vent their anger, would it be a problem to deal with a lone itinerant cultivator? When the time came and they made a move, they would immediately be exposed. Fortunately, although he wasn't in a good mood and was a little absent-minded when doing things, he didn't lose a single piece of equipment while walking, including the 2 sets of jade pieces on his feet. This also included a bamboo hat and a white cloth covering his face. This was the standard equipment for walking in the Gobi Desert. Putting it here actually made him feel like he was wearing a mask. He wasn't the only one. In fact, everyone was the same. In the Chi Eater stage, they couldn't ignore the environment like Foundation establishment cultivators. Then, let's have a place to vent our depression. Lu Xiaoyi estimated the distance between him and these people. When he was several hundred feet away, he suddenly accelerated and ran straight ahead in the direction of the depths of the Gobi Desert. He couldn't turn back. He couldn't bring danger back to Pooh City and bring danger to his home. Why are you running? We just want to ask you what happened in this area recently. It's not like we want your life. A voice full of energy came from behind him. Lu Xiaoyi laughed as he ran. If you don't chase me, I won't run. If you don't surround me, I won't run. Do you think I'm stupid? If I'm surrounded by you guys, won't everything you say be reasonable? He ran easily and didn't look like he was putting his life on the line. The 2 people in front of him were cursing and scolding this guy for being troublesome. With this guy in front of them, they might have to waste a few more talismans. They also felt a bit pained. Why didn't he run in another direction? What a fool. About 10 feet away, 2 cultivators blocked his path, one on the left and one on the right. One of them threw out a spirit fire talisman, while the other threw out a water arrow talisman. Both of them were talismans of the lowest level in the Chi Eater stage. They weren't used to kill, but to delay. They found the corpses of 2 of their companions nearby, so they needed to understand the situation nearby. Therefore, they only wanted to capture the cultivator in front of them alive. They really didn't think he was the murderer. The real murderer probably ran away long ago. Would he be stupid enough to come back and walk right into their trap after so many days? As soon as the talismans were thrown out, Lu Xiaoyi's speed suddenly increased. At the same time, he drew his sword. This was a big weakness of talismans used by Chi Eater stage cultivators. Talismans couldn't be found automatically. This was because everyone didn't have divine sense. In the rhythm of the change in speed, the 2 talismans both fell behind him. The distance of less than 10 feet was covered in a flash. 2 streaks of blood spurted out. But this time, Lu Xiaoyi didn't sway because he didn't stop. After he slashed out, he didn't even look continuing to run into the depths of the desert. However, based on the feeling in his hand, these two people were probably going to report to the king of hell. Several voices came from behind him. There were cries of alarm, curses, and sorrowful cries. However, this had nothing to do with him. He continued to run forward unhurriedly. He had already run for nearly 10 years in the terrain within a radius of several hundred li, where there were pits, where there was water, where there was floating sand, where there were sandbags. They were all in his mind. As long as they dared to chase, he had the confidence to make them all stay in this expanse of yellow sand. The pursuit behind him suddenly sped up. None of these people had thought that they would surround the real murderer so easily. One after another, flames rose into the air, guiding the murderer's direction. Lu Xiaoyi immediately understood that the number of people the other party had dispatched this time was probably far more than these 10. However, since he had already started, there was no reason to turn back. He could only brace himself and continue forward. Let's see if the tiger cub skill was higher or if the wolf pack strength was greater. Chapter 130. Swordsman Crossing the River will be published on August 1st. Before that, Sloth would like to make a request. Data is the foundation of online literature. Whether it is recommendations, collections, monthly votes, or subscriptions, they all determine the direction of a book. Sloth is also a layman, so he still has to make some requests. The most important thing at the beginning of the publication is the first order. This is the only time, so I hope everyone can support me. Swordsman Crossing the River had 500 first orders, which was terrible. But later, with the support of readers, there was some improvement. Thank you, everyone. Swordsman Crossing the River had a higher starting point than Swordsman Crossing the River, so Sloth naturally had some improper thoughts. It is human nature, so please forgive me. First order can represent many things, such as popularity, results, and the arrangement of recommendation spots. These can also determine the success or failure of a book. So please, it will be released on August 1st. On the day it was released, 3,000 initial subscriptions plus 20 chapters, 5,000 initial subscriptions plus 30 chapters, 10,000 initial subscriptions plus 100 chapters. This is impossible. After the monthly ticket sales exceeded 2,000, every 500 tickets would add one chapter. This is a psychological stimulation method. For real readers, it is to make them laugh. In fact, Sloth is not greedy for money, but for the reader's time. Because there are always many readers who will not read the book on August 1st for various reasons, such as laziness, forgetting, going with girls, winning the lottery, etc. If there is nothing important, take some time out to help me. Sloth will be very grateful. There are also many readers from other websites or pirated books. Everyone has their own situation. It is a principle to act according to one's ability. Sloth will not blame anyone, but it take a few minutes to download the Chidian app and spend 80 yuan for the first order. This is not asking for much, right? This is very important to Sloth. If you really like this book, it is actually a very simple thing, and there's basically no cost. Originally, he wanted to write many reasons, such as having old and young children at home, being plagued by illness, being in debt, not having enough food to eat, not having enough clothes to cover his body. But after thinking about it, he realized that they were all adults. So who was he trying to fool? I will just say it directly. I want to collect literature, but my wallet is not full. Is this reason enough? On August 1st, bring your family and friends to help Lai Lai. Thank you. Chapter 131. P.S. August 1st, please support us. Both sides were moving like galloping horses. In fact, it was a bit of an overestimation to call them evading techniques. It was something between lightness technique and evading techniques in the mortal world. Who had ever seen a real foundation establishment cultivator moving his legs like a fan? They were like this now. Lu Xiaoyi was currently using the whirling wind escape armor, which allowed him to conserve a little bit of spiritual power. These were all feints. He had been running with his sword and saber for nearly 10 years, so he knew all too well how to kill while running. These people had intercepted him in the Gobi Desert. Sooner or later, they would regret it. In less than a moment, The distance between him and the pursuers had been reduced to less than 100 feet. On the one hand, these people were really fast, and on the other hand, he did it deliberately. There was a sand dune in front of him. It was half soil, 1,000 feet in diameter, and more than 100 feet high. It was nameless. It was the first transfer point that Lu Xiaoyi had prepared for him. Brushing past the edge of the sand dune, he turned inside and disappeared from the sight of the cultivators. Everyone couldn't fly, and the vision of these cultivators was no different from that of ordinary people. According to common sense, he would appear from the other side of the sand dune after 10 breaths. The leader of the pursuers waved his hand. There were roads everywhere in the Gobi, so there was no need to follow the murderer. Under his signal, the 4 cultivators no longer took the original path, but went directly to the other side of the sand dune. They had to follow him. Reinforcements would arrive soon. At that time, the murderer wouldn't be able to escape. In the blink of an eye, they arrived at the sand dune. As soon as the 4 cultivators turned the corner of the sand dune, a figure on the opposite side was already rushing at them at high speed. The 4 of them immediately understood this guy's idea, but they didn't have much time to react. Both sides were moving at high speed. The distance of 100 feet was covered in a flash. With a previous bloody experience, the 4 of them were like 4 frightened birds, suddenly exploding in flocks. Actually, if they could work together, the 4 of them attacking together, this ferocious person would only be in for a bad time. But in an alliance of rogue cultivators, they didn't know each other before, so how could they entrust their safety to others? Out of the 4 of them, 1 rolled to the left, 1 rolled to the right, 1 jumped into the air, and 1 slid on the ground. They even stirred up a large amount of sand to cover their bodies. Lu Xiaoyi also rose from the ground. This one was too cunning. He did not know what kind of tricks it was hiding in the flying sand. There was too little time, so it was not good to touch it. However, the one who had jumped up had lost his mind. The enemy was right in front of him, yet he had exposed his lower body. Wasn't this just courting death? He didn't jump as high as the other person, but he did it on purpose. He held his sword vertically and cut between the other person's legs. At the same time, a flying dagger flashed. This was already his greatest ability. If he used throwing knives to attack more people, he couldn't guarantee his strength and accuracy. The leader of the cultivators stood up from the sand with his face covered in dust. He discovered that the one who had leaped into the air was clutching his lower abdomen with both hands. Blood was flowing out like a broken dam. The other cultivator who had leaped to the left was lying motionless on the sand. There was a bloodstain on his back. It seemed that he had been pierced by a sharp object. Both of them couldn't live anymore. Lu Xiaoyi changed his direction and began to run back. After running for a while, he felt that something was wrong. He looked back and saw that no one was chasing after him. He could only slow down his pace. It was not that he was addicted to killing, but this kind of practical running fighting style greatly satisfied his inner needs. It was close to perfection. If he could replace the swinging of the sword and throwing of the flying daggers with a continuous barrage of spells, TSK, the scene would be too beautiful. For now, he could only put up with it. The pursuers were in a more awkward position. How could the 2 who had escaped death have the courage to chase after him alone? On the other side, the 4 people who had split up did not see the change on the other side of the sand dune. When they crossed the sand dune and found that there was no one, they turned back to look. When they found that there were only 2 people left in the other group, the situation suddenly became gloomy. This murderer was not easy to deal with. Cruel, ruthless, and most importantly, his fighting style in a place like the Gobi Desert would weaken the advantage of numbers to the greatest extent. No one was stupid. The battle situation was not difficult to analyze. They were here to make a fortune, not to fight to the death. They could accept that fighting to a certain extent could maximize their profits. But if they had to fight with their lives on the line, this was beyond their psychological bottom line. Their group was a cultivator group from a nearby county. They had gathered dozens of people and were one of the 3 main groups of the Red Line Alliance. According to their division of labor, 2 groups were responsible for catching worms, while the other was responsible for cleaning up the surrounding area. After a period of time, they would rotate and the red line worms they caught would be evenly divided among everyone. They were the group responsible for cleaning up the area during this period. Because they had lost 2 members, they had searched this area. In the end, they did not expect to run into such a half-baked thing. His wretched tactics, his ability to fight while on the move, his powerful ability to break through defenses, and his perfect coordination with the environment. When all of these were added together, the price they had to pay was that 6 out of their team of dozens had already been killed by this person. This was not a small number. Most importantly, if they continued to chase, who knew how many more people would die? Be careful of this person's tactics. This person is very cunning and is good at using the environment to counterattack. The leader was still warning them, but no one was looking at him. Instead, they were looking at a small sand dune several hundred feet away. The murderer was walking forward step by step. He was walking. Why didn't you run? If you ran out of sight, everyone would have an easier time, you know? The leader was giving you a bunch of bullshit advice. His only real goal was to give you time to run, you know? Even if you wanted to run, why didn't you find a place where you could hide from everyone's sight? You had to at least give everyone a reason to pretend they couldn't see you, right? You King wandered around in front of everyone so brazenly. Weren't you just luring everyone to chase after you? Then you kill them one by one. Longzi, everyone in the world wanted to save face. Couldn't they be considerate of each other? Awkward. Really awkward. The leader felt that he really couldn't make up any more stories. Continue the chase, or go back and make a fortune with his life. This choice was actually not that difficult. Thank the heavens, there was always a way out. A small group of 7 to 8 cultivators ran over from afar. They were the reinforcements that Xin had called for. The leader was also a somewhat famous rogue cultivator, Linen. He was famous for his tough methods and bad temper. When he saw the tragic scene and learned that the other party was alone, he couldn't help but feel a little angry. There were also several factions in their group. They also had to fight for the right to speak so that they wouldn't be at a disadvantage during the distribution of red threadworms. Seeing these people in such a predicament, Linen Yi's first thought was that they didn't put in effort and were half-hearted. In the end, the other party took advantage of the loophole. Otherwise, out of 10 people, 4 of them were killed while the other party was completely unharmed. How'd they fight? He didn't really want to care about this kind of trivial matter. The ones who died weren't his acquaintances. However, if he wanted to have a greater right to speak in this group and convince more cultivators to follow him, he had to do something. He couldn't just let things go. He looked at the other leader with disdain. I, Linen, can help you with this. However, after this matter is done, Brother Wu needs to stand on my side during the distribution of red threadworms. This was clearly a demand for authority. This was the characteristic of rogue cultivators in the cultivation world. Otherwise, if there were no benefits, who would be willing to help you? The previous leader side. If Brother Linen is willing to help, then it's a sure thing. My side has already lost its edge, but I can still hold the fort. As for the future distribution, I'll follow Brother Linen's lead. Linen was very satisfied that he had gotten what he wanted. He was also a decisive person and immediately began to make arrangements. Boasting was boasting, and action was action. How could someone who had been in the rogue cultivator circle for a long time be so careless? Group in pairs and cooperate with each other. Advance step by step. Advance separately and attack together. Don't be in a hurry to get close. This person is good at close combat, but no matter how good he is, he's still a human. There will be a moment when his spiritual power will be exhausted. We just need to catch him. Chapter 132. Once everyone had made up their minds, they resumed their pursuit. Linen was confident in his abilities and formed a team with an old friend who had been with him for many years. The others also formed a team with their close friends. Just by relying on each other, they were able to prevent the enemy's surprise attack from going all out. They did not rush to chase, but instead formed a fan shape. As for whether the enemy turned left or right, there would be the closest group to follow. Another small group of 6 people followed behind them, filling in the gaps. If there were any trusted subordinates, they would ask the leader, "Big brother, why do we have to rely on others? In terms of numbers, although we lost 6 people, if we add our own people behind us, we may not be afraid of Lin and E. If he really distributes the red thread worms, I'm afraid we will complain. The leader smiled. Don't worry. It hasn't started yet. Who knows who will survive in the end? Who will fall? Even if Lin and E doesn't die, he will lose a few trusted subordinates. What can he use to talk to me? In the cultivation world, we rely on connections, not brute courage. The pursuit on the Gobi Desert resumed, and the scale was larger than before. A total of 14 people spread out in a fan shape, circling Lu Xiaoyi. Lu Xiaoyi really did not care about this. Self-confidence was cultivated step by step. No one could really kill everyone as soon as they entered the path of Tao. Not to mention strength. How could he not panic when more than 10 cultivators of the same level came at him? Lu Xiaoyi killed people. The first one was the housekeeper of the Hu mansion, who was immortal. Then it was Qing Mu, who was a sneak attack, and he had the idea of running away if he could not kill him. Then it was Yao Mansion, who killed cultivators. It was still a sneak attack, but he no longer had the idea of running away if the sneak attack failed. Then it was the front of the earth cliff, which was not a sneak attack, but a preemptive strike. Looking at his battle experience, it was an experience of growth. He became bolder and bolder. Because of his self-confidence, he was fearless. Now he was running with more than 10 cultivators, but he was not thinking about how to get rid of them, but how to use the environment to nibble at them one by one. He had a very strange kind of confidence, and that was, I haven't even used my trump card yet. In fact, if he had a teacher, he would definitely tell him that his biggest trump card was that sword. It was that set of flying knives. It was the style of running nonstop. He had always been using his sharpest weapon to ambush others, yet he still thought that he was a future master of magic. This was the result of cultivating alone. Rogue cultivators were often like this. They would be blinded by their own hobbies and would not be able to see what was most precious to them. Take Lu Xiaoyi, for example. With his meager abilities, could he kill anyone? Why was he so obstinate? Regarding this, he had no self-awareness at the moment. Following his own plan, he began to run in circles in the Gobi Desert. The rogue cultivators who were chasing him were very experienced. They would not leave him unless they had a good opportunity to do so. They were not in a hurry, and neither was Lu Xiaoyi. Even if he ran like this for 10 days straight, it wouldn't affect him from returning to kill people. However, they still had to make use of the environment. After all, this was not a long-distance race. They needed some excitement. Gradually, in front of him, 3 sand dunes appeared. Each of the sand dunes was smaller than the one he had just run on. They were several hundred feet in diameter and less than 10 feet in height. However, when they were grouped together, Lu Xiaoyi gave them a name, 3 Stars Mound. Looking at the direction he was running in, one of the cultivators in the first group shouted, "Everyone, be careful. This person likes to use the sand dunes to block our line of sight, and then rush back to kill us." The sackclothed man made a hand gesture. 2 of the 4 groups of cultivators did not walk on the flat ground, but went up the sand dunes. First, they occupied the highest point. This was a very smart strategy. The remaining cultivators slowed down their speed. With weapons and talismans in hand, if this person dared to counterattack, as long as they held him back for a few breaths, they would be able to kill him from all directions. For people split into 2 groups to fight for 2 sand dunes. The remaining 4 people slowly closed in from both sides of the sand dunes. They were waiting for their companions who had climbed up the sand dunes to give them directions. Behind these 8 people, there were 6 people who had been killed until they had a psychological barrier. Big Brother, with the sackclothed man's arrangement, I'm afraid it will be difficult for that vicious person to succeed in his sneak attack again. The leader did not say anything. He admired the sackclothed man's tactical ability. However, in the cultivation world, survival did not depend entirely on this. It was more important to know when to advance and when to retreat. Because everyone had slowed down their speed, the 2 groups of cultivators who were climbing the sand dunes were the fastest to reach the top. One of the groups was a step faster. As soon as they climbed up, they shouted danger loudly. The situation was intense. The cultivators below felt their hearts tighten and became even more cautious. However, the danger did not come from the bottom of the sand dunes, but from the top of another sand dune. To Lu Xiaoyi, of course, he would not use the same strategy as before. He could completely change it. Therefore, his counterattack was not at the bottom of the sand dunes, but once he entered the Three Stars Mound and left the line of sight of his pursuers, he rushed to the top of a sand dune with all his strength. There were only two possibilities. If the pursuers did not occupy the high ground, then he could easily break out of the encirclement and everyone could run again. If the pursuers played tricks and occupied the high ground, then he could take away one or two of them. Similarly, he could start a new chapter. The two cultivators who were climbing the other sand dune were a step slower than the other group of cultivators. They heard the danger shout, but subconsciously thought that the murderer must be targeting the people at the bottom of the sand dunes. Therefore, they sped up even faster, wanting to reach the top of the sand dunes to take a look. They had already decided which direction to take next, two on one side and one on the other. With the top of the sand dunes as the meeting point, one side was ignorant, one side was deliberate. They suddenly collided and then separated. Everyone shouted in unison, but how could they stop the sly runner in time? He swaggered off, turning his head repeatedly to signal everyone to follow him. The sackclothed man's face was ashen. He rushed to the top of the sand dunes, only to see the miserable bodies of his two subordinates. He could not bear to look. He finally understood the difficulties of the previous group of people. However, now that he had already boasted, shame could not be sheathed. Could it be that he could only return with his tail between his legs? If that was really the case, his reputation would be ruined. He would no longer have the face to mention his right to speak or the right to distribute resources. Other than going all out, he had no other choice. Next time, when you give the warning, can you please shout out our names too? The sack-clothed man glared fiercely at the group of people who had called the police. There was no other way. When people were in danger, they would subconsciously not think so thoroughly. The leader behind him twirled his beard and smiled, not saying a word. In the cultivation world, you must know when to advance and when to retreat. You must know when to compromise. This was the way of survival. If he was the same as the sack-clothed man, he would probably have become a general without an army, all alone. In the cultivation world, there was never a lack of geniuses and vicious people. When you meet them, you should just retreat. Why must you hit your head and bleed? What was the point? Chapter 133. Lu Xiaoyi continued to wander in front, but he could feel that the pursuers behind him were ready to stake everything on a single throw. Especially a few of them. The murderous intent in their eyes was no joke. With his personality, he viewed life and death lightly. It was not only the lives of others, but also his own life. Especially when it came to battles, he had an extraordinary intuition. When he started running, it was as though everything was under his control. The fiercer his opponent was, the more excited he became. If his opponent was tired and weak, he would not be willing to continue such a game. Simply put, he did not respect life too much. He did not feel that there was anything wrong with that. He was becoming more and more confused about his past, but now was not the time to think about it. Due to anger, the hemp-clothed assassin and his subordinates began to deviate from their original intention of staying together. They began to act rashly and take risks, especially the hemp-clothed assassin and his companions. They uncharacteristically rushed to the front. At this moment, they realized that if they were to break into a run, the cultivator in front would not be any slower than them. In a hemp-clothed assassin's heart, the strength of this murderer might not be stronger than them. It was just that in such a terrain, such a fighting style had an incomparable advantage. But as long as they could hold him back, even if it was just for a few breaths, he was confident that he could kill this person with his chain of spells and talismans. Now, no one was talking about capturing him alive. What they were truly considering was how to kill him. The confidant of the leader asked softly, "Big brother, the hemp-clothed assassin is going all out. What should we do?" The leader replied softly, "Steady. As long as that person keeps running, We will watch from afar. If he is cornered, then we will immediately surround him. How can we forget the vengeance of 6 brothers? I want all of you to understand that the reason why I am not letting all of you go up is not because I disregard our brotherhood, but because I do not wish to sacrifice the lives of any more brothers. After running for a day, Lu Xiaoyi led them hundreds of miles into the desert. There were sandbags of various sizes here. Because they were too small, they could not be described as sand dunes. If a more accurate description was used, they were more like tombstones. The smallest tombstones were not even as tall as a person, and the tallest tombstones were only as tall as 2 or 3 people. It was easy for people to hide, but it was also easy for people to be exposed. It all depended on whether one was familiar with the tombstones, and whether one knew how to use human vision to deceive others. Lu Xiaoyi called this area, where hundreds of sandbags were formed, a mass grave. As far as he was concerned, this place would become the place where victory would be decided. If he lost, there was no need to say anything. He would just hand over his life to the other party. If he won, the pursuers would completely lose their courage. The Red Line Alliance would only be able to maintain their position in the center of the Gobi Desert. They would no longer be so arrogant as to claim the entire Gobi Desert as their territory. This was also his goal. In the end, he couldn't kill everyone who entered the Gobi Desert. The Gobi didn't belong to the Red Line Alliance. Of course, it didn't belong to Lu Xiaoyi. He just wanted them to understand one thing. Even if they were arrogant, they should know their limits. You can't take all the food for yourself. Seeing the murderer rush into the group of sandbags, swaying a few times before disappearing without a trace, everyone understood that this was the battlefield that Vicious had found for them. He was waiting for them here. Let's see if they dared to enter. As long as a normal cultivator was rational, they wouldn't easily take such a risk in a battle like this. Cultivators were very sensitive to their environment. If they couldn't pull their opponents into an environment they were familiar with, they should at least pull their opponents into an unfamiliar environment. A fierce glint flashed in the sack-clothed man's eyes. Cultivators needed to be rational, but they also needed to be courageous. Especially now, he had been running around for half his life, relying on this reputation of courageous courage to survive in the circle. Others could retreat, but he couldn't. Moreover, he needed to enter as soon as possible. The slower he was, the more time the murderer would have to recover. Gathering everyone together, the sack-clothed man's eyes revealed a fierce glint. For this battle, I'll use myself as bait. I'll walk at the front. We'll jump in the sandbags and not walk below. There's no need to talk about tactical rules. This murderer appears and disappears like a ghost. He can't be judged by common sense. Just one point. Wherever there's any movement, everyone will attack together. Don't be afraid of the slightest thing. The sandbags obstruct us from moving quickly. This is our last chance. If we miss this chance, we won't have another one. I won't be the only one to lose face. Brother Wu, what do you say? The leader with the surname Wu sighed. This is originally everyone's problem. How can I continue to stand by and watch? The reason why we have the intention to retreat is because this environment is too advantageous for this murderer to display his abilities. We're afraid that we'll suffer heavy losses, so we don't want to pursue relentlessly. Since that's the case, Brother Sackclothed, as long as you guys can lure that murderer out, we'll definitely surround him. We won't go back on our words. The two of them swore with their palms raised, and the sack-clothed man's heart calmed down. This murderer had almost no weaknesses in this desert environment. However, he had found one now, and that was this person's psychological weakness, his love of acting like a hero. Facing the pursuit of more than 10 people, he didn't run with all his might. Instead, he wanted to counterattack while running. This was the plot of a self-confident hero. If he really had the strength, he could definitely fight 1 against 10. The reason why he didn't do so was because he knew he couldn't win. In an open environment, this kind of self-confidence could help him kill the pursuers. However, in this sandbag terrain, it might not be so. In this kind of terrain, the so-called evasive movement of a chi-eating cultivator was greatly reduced. Running between sandbags was clearly too stupid. Turning left and right took too much time. Moreover, his speed couldn't increase. There was only one way out, which was to jump on top of the sandbags. However, as long as he jumped, his whereabouts would be exposed. It would be difficult to get out of their encirclement. That's why it's said that the plot of a hero kills. In a decisive battle in this place, he thought he was familiar with the terrain. However, he lost the most important speed, which was also the murderer's most troublesome advantage. On this point, the sackcloth rider saw it very clearly. The leader with the surname Wu also saw it very clearly. This was the basis for the two to work together, to be able to climb and roll for so many years in the cultivation world. Who could be weak? If it wasn't for the power of this guy's sword being too fierce and his control of flying daggers being too unpredictable, based on cultivation level alone, he would have been chopped into pieces long ago. Everyone felt very confident this time. Thus, several cultivators, including the sackcloth rider, slapped talismans on their bodies. Diamond talismans, solid talismans, iron bone talismans. These were all prepared to resist in a situation where they were caught unprepared. There were also those who felt that they might not be able to resist directly. Thus, they slapped talismans on themselves, floating talismans, and so on. Using reaction to dodge the opponent's sword slash could also be considered a method. It was very obvious that the first person to be attacked would definitely bear the greatest pressure. Moreover, it was very likely that he wouldn't be able to resist. It depended on whether he could delay for a few breaths of time to fight for an opportunity for the others. This was a matter of luck. There was a 10 or 20% chance. It wasn't certain death. Follow me. After the preparations were complete, the sackcloth rider took the lead and rushed into the group of sandbags. In order to show his fearless spirit, he no longer hesitated. Instead, he jumped on top of the sandbags. His left hand held a talisman, his right hand held an eyebrow piercer, and his body was covered with iron bone and cool breeze talismans. He didn't believe that with him being so vigilant, his opponent, who was also a chi-eating cultivator, would be able to kill him in a second. Chapter 134. Recalling the previous few ambushes, the true strength of this murderer lay in the fact that he always caught them off guard. It seemed that the real head-on confrontation hadn't happened yet. Him sticking his head out like a bird really raised his morale. It was much more responsible than shouting, "Go for me." The remaining 5 people in his group also jumped out. Everyone jumped on the sandbags and could see each other clearly. They looked at each other from head to tail, looking at each other with an awe-inspiring aura. Big Brother Wu was the exact opposite of them. He liked to deal with things calmly and didn't like to take risks. Let's stay together. Either we search together or chase together. Just don't separate. His confidant laughed softly, or we run together. This was a relatively smooth operation, regardless of whether it was the aggressiveness of the sackcloth group or the calmness of Big Brother Wu's group. But dozens of breaths passed. There were only a few hundred sandbags in front of everyone's eyes, but not a single hair could be seen. Could it be that this madman really ran away this time? But the desert was unobstructed. With so many pairs of eyes watching, it was impossible for this person to run away from the sandbags. The sackcloth guest stood on a tall sandbag in the middle of the sandbags. His clothes and sleeves fluttered as he looked back at Big Brother Wu. Big Brother Wu also took it seriously this time. I've observed this person's actions. Every time he takes a risk, he doesn't follow the conventional rules. If he does it once, he definitely won't do it a second time. Therefore, the possibility of him still being in the sandbags is very high. It's just that. The sackcloth guest smiled sinisterly. Hiding in the sand. This was the most suitable method for the murderer. He also had enough time. Now that the ground was mainly covered in sand, it was very easy to hide himself. If it was a foundation establishment cultivator, they would only need to use their divine sense to scan the area. But they were chi-eaters, so they could only see with their naked eyes. How could they see through the sand, even if it was just a thin layer? The sackcloth guest took out a carved bow from his storage ring. This time, he didn't even care about revealing his trump card. This was a rare, semi-magic tool spirit bow. It was a treasure that he had relied on to run rampant for dozens of years. The reason why he didn't use it before was because his accuracy wasn't good enough while running. Shooting an arrow while moving, he had to hit a fast-moving target dozens of feet ahead. This wasn't something that could be practiced. He could only rely on luck. If his arrow didn't hit the target, the opponent would be on guard. This was the disadvantage of not being guided by divine sense. Drawing his bow and setting an arrow, the entire group of sandbags was within his shooting range. At this moment, he was in a horse stance. His strength came from his feet, and his spiritual power surged. Looking down from a high vantage point, he was in the best position to shoot. His companion also did his best. He jumped down from the sandbag and stepped through the surrounding area to make sure that no murderers would jump out and hurt anyone nearby. After finishing their preparations, Big Brother Wu's group also chose a favorable position and prepared to pounce at any moment. Seeing that everyone was confident, the sack-clothed man shouted, "East!" This was to divide the sandbags into 4 areas: north, south, east, and west. It was beneficial for concentrating their forces on clearing the sandbags. As for the other 3 areas, Big Brother Wu only needed to assign 2 people to watch over them. Strict and meticulous, he was indeed an outstanding individual cultivator who could form the Red Line Alliance. There were no more than 100 sandbags in the entire sandbag cluster, and there were no more than 30 sandbags in each of the 4 directions. They were the size of tombstones, and in such a small area, nothing could be hidden from the 5 cultivators. They didn't even need to use their weapons to pierce the ground inch by inch. They only needed to stomp on the ground and send out their spiritual energy to clearly see what was hidden in the ground within a radius of several zhang. Because of the death of their companion, the cultivators were very focused. At least 2 people would step on the same area in order to not leave any room for error. If a cultivator buried himself in the sand and was attacked by spiritual energy, he would be injured if he didn't circulate his qi to resist it. If he did, he would expose himself. There was no third possibility. After 15 minutes, the east area had been carefully plowed through, and nothing unusual was found. The sack-clothed man pointed his bow to the south. South! The 5 of them repeated their search, but the result was the same. The sack-clothed man's heart was like stone, and his expression didn't change. The more critical the moment was, the more he couldn't show any hesitation as the leader. West. North. The north area was the area that the cultivators were most worried about. That was because the murderers could be hiding there, so they had to be extra careful. Big Brother Wu's group was also slowly approaching, but his trusted subordinate had a different opinion. Big Brother, with that murderer's cunning character, it's impossible for him to not see or hear what we're doing. Since his hiding place has already been seen through, why didn't he take the opportunity to escape while searching in other directions? Why did he wait for us to find him? This doesn't fit his style of doing things. Big Brother Wu also felt the same, but he couldn't figure out what the problem was. You just have to remember one thing. As long as the 6 of us stick together, that murderers won't target us. He will only target those who are alone. Everyone nodded their heads. For these people to be able to hang out with Big Brother Wu, they admired his steadiness. He knew when to advance and retreat and wouldn't risk everyone's lives. Very quickly, the north area was also searched. Just as some people had guessed, they didn't find anything. This time, even the sack-clothed man furrowed his brows. What made it very difficult for him was that he wasn't sure if this person really intended to compete with them here. For cultivators like them, their escape technique was between relying on the natural laws of Foundation establishment to completely float and a mortal's brilliant qin gong to leave behind traces. In other words, their escape technique wouldn't leave behind footprints, but it could leave behind traces. For example, fine scratches. Because of the surging qi waves, the sand was slightly shorter than normal sand. However, because they were too confident, the few of them went in and stepped everywhere, destroying the scene. It was impossible to determine the murderer's whereabouts based on the traces left behind. However, he was also very sure that this person couldn't have left just like that. That was because cultivator's eyesight could clearly see a large bird 10 li away in the boundless desert. How could they not see such a big living person after leaving the sandbags? If one person was blind, would a dozen people also be blind? A cultivator put forward a suggestion. Big brother Ma, it's also possible that this person has a special magic item, like your bow. Or maybe he hid it very deeply. When we stomp our feet, we can only affect a depth of 3 chi. Any deeper than that would be beyond our power. The sackclothed man pondered. That makes sense. There's such a possibility. We can't give up our initial judgment just because we haven't found him yet. But before that, we have to look at the other side of the sandbags, which is the other side of the direction we entered, to see if there are any traces of a human leaving. After all, if everyone missed it, it could only be in that direction. He was still a little worried. What if this person really left? Wouldn't they become the biggest joke in the cultivation circle in recent years if a group of people were to dig here and there while licking their butts? The 5 cultivators also felt that it made sense. To be honest, in order to chase after this person, they were really tired out for more than a day. Not only were they tired physically, but they were also mentally tired. Then, it would be good to go to the edge of the sandbags to check if there were any traces of movement. At least, they could be sure that this person had gone far away, or was he hiding among the sandbags? Chapter 135. Danger had quietly descended upon them. Everyone had subconsciously confirmed that the vicious man had 2 options. It was either one or the other. But they did not expect that he actually had a 3rd option. What if the vicious man was hiding under the sand outside the sandbags? They had guessed correctly. In the vast desert, since he could not fly, then burrowing was a must. The problem was that even if Lu Xiaoyi wanted to have showdown with them, he did not necessarily have to hide among the sandbags. Wouldn't it be better to find a shallow spot a few feet away from the sandbags and bury himself? Seeing the 5 companions forcefully patrolling the sandbags on the other side, looking for traces, without the previous strict mutual protection, the linen visitor and brother Wu subconsciously felt that something was amiss. Then, they reacted at the same time. Danger! This was the linen visitor's warning. Come back! This was brother Wu's reminder. But the 2 of them had made the same fatal mistake as the cultivator who had made a mistake on the sand dune previously. That was, when you shout danger, you have to have subject. The 5 cultivators subconsciously thought that the danger came from within the sandbags. Just as they raised their heads to look, the sand behind one of the cultivators silently slid away, and a long sword was raised upwards. Following that, a figure sprang up from the ground, running in the direction of a cultivator's body, blocking the arrow that the linen visitor was about to release. Beiju, get down. This time, the sack-clothed man finally remembered the main sentence he wanted to say. He meant to tell his subordinates not to stand in the way. But for a cultivator who was only a few feet away from the murderer, there was no idea more stupid than telling him to lie down. Beiju was very obedient, because he knew how terrifying Brother Ma's engraved bow was. But before the arrow could fly past his prone body, several flying daggers had already pierced through his body. Lu Xiaoyi ran like a snake, increasing his speed to the maximum. He did not even hesitate to use the 4th gear of the tornado escape technique to achieve the goal of quickly widening the distance between them. Lying in the sand, he could see very clearly with his eyes open. When he saw the flashy cultivator standing in the middle with a big bow, he knew that this thing was very powerful. Hence, he was really running this time, running with all his might. Running like a snake, he instantly increased his speed. A scorching ray brushed past him at a speed that he could not react to. That was not an arrow. Instead, it was a mass of spiritual energy, a power that a chi-eating cultivator could not contend against. Lu Xiaoyi felt that this power was a huge threat to him. He simply ended the game and ran further and further away until he disappeared. He had lost interest in continuing the chase, and so had the pursuers. There was nothing more infuriating than an enemy like this. 10 cultivators had already lost their lives in the hands of this demon. What was frightening was not his strength, but his mind. Cruel, patient, cunning, despicable, and unscrupulous. He only had 2 moves, the sword, the chop, and the stab, but there were countless ways to use them. They were never repeated. They were perfectly integrated with nature, the environment, the human heart, judgment, and insight. This was a fatal blow. The leader, Brother Wu, walked over inside. Brother Ma-Yi, our patrol time is almost up. Our brothers came out to accumulate resources, so I can't stop them from going back. If you don't keep an eye on those red thread worms, who can tell if there are more or less of them? Cultivation is for longevity, not fighting for one's life. I will return now. What about you guys? He looked at his companions with a desolate expression. Although he did not say anything, he could see the answer from their eyes. His glory was gone. If he wanted to get it back, there was only one way. Bring my 3 brothers back. Promise me that you will take good care of them. Big Brother Wu couldn't help but be moved. Although Linen Robe was unruly and had a violent temper, at certain times he had an awe-inspiring and inviolable bearing. If such a person were to walk out, he would definitely be an overlord. The 3 subordinates spoke in unison and wanted to continue following him, but they were rudely interrupted by Ma-Yi. Everyone has their own pursuits. There is no need to change yourself for others. You may feel loyalty now, but when the time passes, you will regret it. Why bother? What you're pursuing now is resources. Then go and gather resources. What I'm pursuing now is spirit. Resources are secondary. This is irreplaceable. In the field of spirit, no one can help each other. When I come back, we will still be good brothers. Lu Xiaoyi took a big detour and returned to Pu City. No matter how magnanimous his heart was, he should not continue to stay in the Gobi Desert for the time being. This was not the time to be a hero. He had killed 10 people and still acted like he was invincible. That would be foolish behavior. Even if he knew very well that if the other party continued to form an organization, the possibility of them causing trouble on a large scale was very small. When an individual gained an advantage in a confrontation with an organization, even if it was a loose alliance, one should not be overly indulged in one's own achievements. An alliance could fail, and if they failed, they could start over again. However, an individual would not have the chance to start over again. Therefore, he had to retreat and give the other party a way out. He had to give him a reason to be too lazy to pursue the matter. He should not continue to hang on the cliff top and pretend to be a big shot. Even if he made such a judgment, he could not rule out the possibility that an individual would make an irrational choice out of humiliation. The north gate of Pu City was the most leisurely of the 4 city gates of Pu City. This was because it faced the Gobi Desert. Most of the people who entered and exited it were the indigenous people of the Sand Nation. There were relatively few commercial activities there. After all, there were very few caravans who had the ability to pass through the Gobi Desert. If they had the energy, they would rather spend more time taking a detour than suffer in the Gobi Desert for more than 10 days. Leisurely meant that there were fewer customers passing by, and it also meant that there was less profit to be made. To the soldiers guarding the city gates, this was the most unpopular job among the 4 city gates of Pu City. It was impossible for them to take turns. There were always close and distant relationships, and there were also distant relationships. The gate officers who were sent here were the ones who had the worst relationships with others. Lao Bai was such a person. He had been in the army for dozens of years and did not have any other skills in life. He had many bad habits, but he did not earn much. He was all alone, without a wife or children. He had been hanging around in the ranks of the city soldiers. He had a bad temper. He took advantage of his age and seniority to say strange things. Who would be willing to listen to him? Therefore, he stayed at the North Gate. It was his own doing, so he could not blame anyone. Yesterday, a friend of his who worked in the yamen invited him for a drink and introduced him to a business. A child from a wealthy family was spoiled by his mother's family. After the child's father returned from a distant business trip, he felt that the child was too good for nothing and needed to be beaten up. Therefore, he wanted to change the child's environment to make him suffer more. Chapter 136. The idea was good, but he didn't expect that he couldn't hide anything from his mother's powerful family. No matter where he was arranged, whether it was on the counter, in the restaurant, or in the warehouse, he would be treated like a young master. He couldn't achieve the purpose of training at all, so he thought of a way to send the child to the North Gate to be a doorman. The condition was that he would be treated the same as the other doormen. If others had to eat chaff, he would have to eat chaff. If others were hungry, he would have to starve. If others were working, he couldn't be idle. 1 month, he would pay 10 taels of silver up front. If he did well, and the young master changed, he would be rewarded with another 10 taels of silver. This was the strangest business that Old Bai had ever heard of in his 40 years of life, but it was also the simplest business. It was to insert a soldier into the city gate team. Such a small matter was not worth mentioning to him. A city gate official who was not qualified to be a city gate official. Early this morning, he found a fitting soldier's uniform for the young master. It couldn't be considered armor, but there was a soldier embroidered on the chest and a soldier embroidered on the back. It was just this kind of thing. Wearing it in summer was hot, and wearing it in winter was cold. Although the young master was not particularly tall, his figure was very tall. It was a sign that he had been well nourished since he was young. Regarding this, although Lao Bai, who was thin and slightly bulky, never said anything, he hated the injustice of the world and the unfairness of the heavens in his heart. Usually, he didn't dare to show it. If he was slightly disrespectful to these influential families, he would lose his job at any time. But now, there was such a natural opportunity to torture the rich family's young master, and the more he tortured, the more he would gain. How could he let it go? Early in the morning, when the young master was led to the military station in the north of the city, the torture began. After putting on a uniform and boots, the other soldiers went to the city gate, but he who came late had to carry 7 or 8 spears to the city gate. In peaceful times, people usually just carried a saber at their waist. Most of the time, they didn't even have a saber, but only a saber handle on the sheath to scare people. Although a saber of a few kilograms wasn't heavy, if it was hung for a day, it would be very tiring. Therefore, no one would bring a spear to the city gate. Making the young master carry, it was torturing him. Although the military depot was not far from the city gate, it was still several hundred zhang away. 7 or 8 spears, when bundled together, weighed several dozen jin. Even Lao by himself would have to take a few breaths to catch his breath in this hot weather. However, this young master he didn't stop. Lao Bai couldn't help but sigh in admiration. Eating beef and mutton from a young age was indeed different from eating vegetables. Lao Bai also knew that he could not order the young master around, but basically, he had to do whatever the others did. There was no preferential treatment. The food was simple. Although he was fed, there was basically no meat. From the time the city gates opened until the beginning of the evening, he had to stand for a total of 12 hours. Even if he did not do anything, his body would not be able to take it. Their duties were also very simple. It was to check the passers-by, especially the strangers, their travel permits, official documents, their purpose of origin, whether they were criminals wanted by the government. When the caravans passed by, they would also check whether they were carrying prohibited items, whether the goods were the same as what was written on the official documents, and so on. Of course, the scale had to be controlled by themselves. How much money they could earn depended on their own ability. If they were able to find the smuggled goods, they would be rewarded. If they couldn't find the smuggled goods, they could only obediently let them go. When doing this, they had to be experienced. The young master usually watched from the side. He did not like to talk and covered his face tightly with a white cloth. This was very common in Poo City. The sandstorm was strong. So many people dressed like this. Otherwise, their nostrils would be full after a day. Lao Bai understood his thoughts. If the reputable young master of Poo City were to guard the city gate here, wouldn't he be a laughing stock if those rich kids saw him? Therefore, he had to cover his face tightly. The more Lao Bai interacted with him, the more he felt that this young master wasn't as bad as his family said. He was hard-working, taciturn, and unable to utter a single word. Most of the time, he would just hold his spear and stare blankly at the customers passing by. If all the soldiers under his command were like him, Lao Bai felt that he would be much less worried. After a few days, he also gave up the idea of torturing him. Instead, he wanted to know which family's young master was from. From the beginning, this young master had covered his face, and it seemed like he had never taken it off. This made Lao Bai feel much less worried. There were also some soldiers with bad intentions, but the young master was strong and never fought for anything. Therefore, they slowly began to accept him. Days like this passed very quickly. The boring tasks seemed to be able to torture people until they became stupid. 7 to 8 bored people would hide in the cave of the city gate and judge every passerby. This person was a profiteer, that person was from the Sand Nation, this old woman was very talkative, and that young woman had very fair skin. They did this to pass the time. This was a boring life, and someone had to do it. At this time, the young master was always silent. He was so silent that it made people think that he was mute. Lao Bai suspected that this was a young master who was not from the direct line of descent and was ostracized by the family. Why was he so listless? A month later, it was almost too sure. It was a beautiful evening. The setting sun and the desert were a perfect match, setting off each other. There was a kind of beauty that made one's soul tremble. The young master liked to see this the most, although his companions had long been accustomed to it. 2 desert camels trotted over unhurriedly. A person sat on one of the camels and covered his face with a thick cloth. This was not new. Almost all the people who came from the Gobi Desert in the north dressed like this. The timing was quite accurate. At the city gate, this person did not dismount from the camel. He just handed over his travel permit. Generally, people who did this were people with high status. Ordinary people would not dare to do this. The more it was like this, the more careful the soldiers guarding the city would be. They would not dare to act rashly. There was no problem with the travel permit. It came from the prefecture on the other side of the Gobi Desert. It was a big place, and it was stamped with a mansion recruitment seal. Ordinary people could not reach this level. Looking at the clothing, it was very noble. It was not something that ordinary people could afford. Therefore, Lao Bai respectfully handed over the travel permit with both hands and was about to wave his hand to let the person pass. As for the careful inspection, there was no such thing. It was blasphemy to let a noble open his bag and show his face. However, the young master, who had not spoken for a month, suddenly uttered a sentence in a low voice. The entrance fee is 2 taels of silver. Lao Bai and the other soldiers were very surprised. It was not only the young master who had spoken for the first time, but also the price tag was very high. Generally, when a large camel caravan passed through the city, it would only pay 1 tael of silver to avoid trouble. For an individual merchant, even if there was a little problem, it would be fine to pay a few taels of silver. If you charged too much and reported it to the government, it would be troublesome for the soldiers guarding the city. There was only one reason for daring to ask for 2 taels of silver. This customer had a problem. Chapter 137. Before Lao Bai could stop the crazy young master, the guest on the camel had already tossed out a piece of silver. It looked like it was more than 2 taels. Lao Bai picked up the silver from the ground. He did not feel that it was disrespectful to him at all. Years of hardships and the pressure of life had made him forget about his dignity. Just as he was about to signal his soldiers to make way, the young master behind him suddenly said something. "Open your face. I'm looking at you." He was treating the guest like a suspected fugitive. Could it be that the silent young master had noticed something wrong? Lao Bai was snobbish, but he had been guarding the door for decades and was extremely experienced. If the guest had not paid the silver, he would have scolded the young master and asked him to make way. Since the guest had paid the silver, it most likely meant that the guest was guilty, or a big fish, or a big case. Anyway, the young master would take care of it. His family was powerful, so it would not be the small city guard's turn to be beaten. This was Lao Bai's idea. Since the young master wanted to stand up for the guest, they might as well do it once. Who knows, they might even make a lot of money. The guest hesitated for a moment. He probably felt that there was no need to lower himself to the same level as these lowly soldiers and cause unnecessary trouble. Hence, he raised his head and took off his mask, revealing a face that was different from the others. His face was full of pockmarks and a terrifying scar. It was obvious that he had been cut by a sharp weapon. A noble would not look like this. The Kingdom of Darkness was a country with rules. Whether it was the officials or the merchants, they valued appearance and image very much. A face like this guest could not possibly exist in the upper class. Lao Bai was relieved. This person was indeed not one of the dozens of wanted posters that had been sent to Pooh City. However, based on his appearance, there was nothing wrong with investigating him. For people in the martial arts world, only a ruthless investigation could lead to a fat harvest. This time, there was no need for the young master to interrupt. Lao Bai was able to handle everything by himself. He was the expert in how to extract the most profit from the young master. Open your camel. Open your bag. Your origin is unknown. I suspect that you are carrying prohibited items. As the Northgate officer of Pooh City, I have the right to ask you to cooperate with our investigation. Senior White's plan was really well-reasoned and watertight, and he was very familiar with it. When the soldiers behind him heard this, they were shocked, because this usually meant that they would be able to eat until their stomachs were full. Those who held the saber pressed the saber, and those who held the spear raised the spear. They had practiced this scene countless times and were very familiar with it. The customer was surprised, but he didn't argue. He slowly got off the camel and looked at Lao Bai, who had a serious expression on his face. He raised his hand and slapped Lao Bai. Lao Bai spun as he flew out. The soldiers behind him hurriedly caught him. Covering his face, he felt that half of his gums had loosened. Although his position was lowly, he had never suffered such a great loss in the 10 years he had been in the position of City Gate Commander. Even if he occasionally crossed the line, the big shots wouldn't really bother with a small fry like him. Even if he was a sticky candy, he could not be killed over such a small matter. Sticky hands. This time, a stranger with a pockmarked face actually dared to slap him in the face. In his anger, he didn't care about anything else. He shouted, "Brothers, take down this notorious thief for me." In his anger, he didn't forget to pin a crime on him. Before he could finish his words, his subordinates were still hesitating. Suddenly, a blood-stained spear tip suddenly appeared on the chest of the guest with the pockmarked face, who was standing there calmly and leisurely. Pockmarked face was full of disbelief. He had never thought that the sack-clothed traveler, who had roamed unhindered for a lifetime and was renowned in several provinces and counties, would actually die in such a bizarre manner from the soldiers at the city gate, who demanded money from him. What was this place? Wasn't Pooh City the land of the night? How dare they block the road and rob people in broad daylight? Was there any law? He wanted to turn around with difficulty, but at the same time, he realized that something was wrong. If it was really an ordinary soldier who stabbed him in the back, it was impossible for him not to feel it. Since he was able to hide from him, he was definitely not an ordinary person, but a cultivator. The spear tip spun cruelly, and his heart was in a mess. He could no longer control his body, and he couldn't see the person who ambushed him. However, a faint voice came from behind him. "You shouldn't have come to me. The rules of the cultivation world are set according to the rules. Didn't you think of the consequences when you came to find me?" He understood everything now. The pockmarked face customer's body went limp, and he lost control of his bladder. If it wasn't for the support of the spear, he would have become a puddle of mud on the ground. His glory was gone. His dreams were lost. Was it worth it just for that trace of unwillingness in his heart? No expression could be seen under the thick bandage on his face. There was only a spear in his hand, and he walked towards a small corner gate beside the city gate. The pockmarked face customer was still hanging on the spear. The soldiers opposite him, including the so-called experienced Lao Bai, were all dumbfounded. Lao Bai's lips trembled uncontrollably, and at the same time his body trembled. That bastard. "I only asked you to take him, but I didn't ask you to stab him. What should we do? What should we do?" The young master entered the corner gate, and a voice came out. "Bring the dessert camels over." Clean up the bloodstains. Everyone, come and get your share. This sentence was more effective than anything else. How could there be any good people who had been here for so many years? Even the most honest person would change after staying here for a year. In a flurry, they picked up a few buckets of water next to them and washed it down. Fortunately, the sand and stone road did not leave any color, so it was just a little darker. After being exposed to the sun for a day tomorrow, no one would be able to tell. Everyone hugged the two dessert camels and Lao Bai and squeezed into the corner gate together. No one looked at the gate. Who cared about that when it was time to split the loot? A corpse and a few bags, that was all. A few soldiers were nimble, but when they opened the bags, they were greatly disappointed. They were all ordinary things, and there was no money. But when they touched the corpse, they were overjoyed. There were more than 100 taels of silver in the pockmarked man's pocket. They didn't know how he hid it. Even they, who had sharp eyes, did not see it before. Instead, it was the taciturn young master who saw it. Everyone unanimously believed that this was a notorious thief, but the wanted poster had not been issued yet. Of course, they would think so. The person had already been killed, so what else could they think? Were they scaring themselves? The silver was divided into 7 portions, and the 2 largest portions were for Lao Bai and the young master. Although the young master had the least experience, a person who dared to kill, even if he only came for a day, the largest portion would definitely be his. This was only the first division. The 2 dessert camels outside could be sold for more than 100 taels of silver, so they could divide it again. Under the stimulation of money, the soldiers were very efficient. The dessert camels were led to the dessert camels outside the city, and the corpses were sent to the wild wolf ditch. There was no need to bury them. They were left there for 3 days, and not even the bones would be left. All traces had been wiped clean. The young master glanced at Lao Bai, who had not completely recovered, and thought to himself, "This guy is not as ruthless as his subordinates." He stuffed the silver into Lao Bai's pocket, and for the first time, he spoke more than usual. "No one will investigate this person's background. You don't have to worry at all. As for me, if someone really asks, just say that I know I've committed a capital crime and have fled to the ends of the world." He didn't say much and left. Lao Bai's legs went soft, and he sat down on the ground. Chapter 139. Everything had happened too quickly and too suddenly. It had not even been a moment since the killing, the splitting of the loot, and everyone had gone their separate ways. It was only after the young master had left that he realized what had happened. This person was not a young master at all. He was an assassin. To think that he had ordered him around without knowing that he was playing a prank on the Grim Reaper. This person's target was the pockmarked man. For this, he had waited here for a month. However, if it was a vendetta in the Jianghu, then no one would investigate this person's death, as long as they did not leave any traces behind. Suddenly, he remembered something. He got up from the ground and hurriedly ran to the magistrate's office. How many years had it been since he had been so anxious? The sky was already dark when he arrived at an official's residence and asked his friend out. The friend looked at him and smiled. "Old Bai, are you here to ask me out for a drink?" Old Bai grabbed his wrist. "Tell me the truth. Which family is that young master who is the doorman from? What's his name?" The friend was shocked. "What young master? Why can't I understand what you're saying? Old Bai, have you become muddle-headed from the heat?" Old Bai's face was ashen. He let go of his hand. "This friend, I can still—" Lu Xiaoyi did not return to Pu City. Instead, he walked through the outskirts of the city. His destination was a manor in the southern part of Lu province. Of course, it was now under the name of the housekeeper of the inner residence. Old Tuesday Lu Yaosher was recuperating in the manor. He had a bad feeling about the Red Line Alliance and the rogue cultivators. Back then, because of his carelessness, he was intercepted in the Gobi Desert. That was how he killed 10 people and forced the enemy to retreat. It sounded very hot-blooded, but he knew that he had a loophole. The loophole was that there was only one nearest city outside the Gobi Desert, Pu City. If the rogue cultivators wanted to know his background, Pu City would be their first choice. Moreover, his judgment was that the other party could not make a big move because they wanted to capture the red line worm. However, the possibility of sending 1 or 2 people in advance to find out his background was quite high. How could they find out? The Sand Nation people at the edge of the Gobi Desert outside Pooh City. Lu Xiaoyi had been cultivating here for nearly 10 years. Most of the people he had met in the Gobi were ordinary Sand Nation people. Therefore, it was not difficult to find his roots after asking around. Most importantly, the Sand Nation people lived in scattered places, and some of them didn't even have fixed residence. He couldn't find the Red Line Alliance cultivators by monitoring them. Therefore, the gate of Pooh City was his only choice. If a cultivator were to enter through the 4 city gates, there was a high chance that they would not take a detour around the other city gates. There was no need for them to be so careful. Even so, as a precaution, he still sent his mother to the village in the southern suburbs. The environment there was elegant and green. In Lu Xiaoyi's heart, the living environment there was much better than the Lu province in the city. Then, all that was left was to wait. What he didn't expect was that the person who came was actually the leader, Hemp Clothes, that flashy, bow-wielding attacker. Well, since he was here, it meant that this was the last trouble. Therefore, after Hemp Clothes took off his scarf and confirmed his identity, he shot him through the heart. This was his style. He would never feel uneasy just because he had launched a sneak attack. There was no such thing as guilt in his heart. When he brought the corpse to the small Jiaoman, he had already taken all the storage rings. It was not that he was greedy, but that it was not suitable for ordinary people to come into contact with these things. The silver in Hemp Clothes' arms was taken by him from the storage rings, so it was not easy to take too much. For these people, a large sum of money could lead to immediate disaster. 100 taels of silver, 10 taels per person, and a few trips to the Turbid Tavern was just right. They would not suddenly become rich and cause trouble. With the troubles in the Gobi Desert, the Red Line Alliance would not last long. With the Red Line worms being hunted indiscriminately, they would become rarer and rarer, and the distribution of benefits would be uneven. Disbanding and infighting would happen sooner or later. At that time, who would pay attention to a fugitive killer on the edge of the Gobi Desert? When he rushed back to the manor, the sky was already completely dark. The manor was brightly lit. His mother was old and did not like the darkness. She would only feel at ease if she saw her son. Only then would she be able to sleep peacefully. The once shrewd and capable woman was no longer there. The one sitting here now was an ordinary mother who looked forward to her child's return every day. This kind of situation made it difficult for Lu Xiaoyi to choose. Should he accompany his mother in her final days and stay by her side? Or should he continue to strive to break through that barrier and reach a higher level to give his mother a longer life? Life always forced you to make choices again and again. It never stopped. On the small square table were Lu Xiaoyi's favorite dishes. These were prepared every day when he returned at this time. Watching him wolf down the food was the happiest time of the day for Lu Yaoshi. I've already distributed the shops in the city. I can't treat the girls who have been with me the longest and those outside. While watching her son eat, Lu Yaoshi muttered. There was no problem with her mind. It was just that she was a little childish now. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. I'll hand it over to old two later. They won't be short of anything. They won't have to worry about the rest of their lives. Actually, they couldn't talk for long. His mother's mind was getting weaker and weaker. She was also getting more and more paranoid. However, he couldn't do anything about it. There weren't many houses in the manor. Most of them were occupied by his mother and the maids. He also didn't have an independent courtyard. It was just a room. However, it didn't matter. To him, the fields outside were more to his liking. He didn't need sleep to ensure his rest. Meditating was enough. It was a very good way to cultivate. Taking advantage of the bright moonlight, he began to rummage through his accidental gains today. It was still the same. Gold and jewels were the most. These things could ensure a cultivator's luxurious life in the mortal world. Then there were elixirs, spirit stones, talismans, spiritual objects, a few low-level spell jade slips, and hundreds of red threadworms in the spirit beast pouch. These were all good things. However, to Lu Xiaoyi, They weren't what he needed the most. He only needed two things now. One was a way to extend his mother's life. The other was something to help him build his foundation. Unfortunately, there were no surprises. There were only two things that he was interested in: the eyebrow piercer and the engraved bow. The weapon he was most comfortable with now was the long sword he got from Liang Quangren. It was mixed with cultivation materials. It wasn't an ordinary weapon. The troublesome thing was that it was too long. He couldn't put it in the storage ring. He could only hang it on his waist. It was a bit conspicuous. This eyebrow piercer was only 1.5 feet long, less than half the length of the long sword. The advantage was that it could be put in the storage ring and wouldn't attract attention. Moreover, the material of this eyebrow piercer was very precious. However, he wasn't interested in comparing the long sword and the eyebrow piercer to determine which one was tougher. Chapter 140. The engraving of the bow should be his biggest gain this time. Looking at the engravings on the bow, there were the three words Kai Tian Bao, which was its name. However, there was no method to use it. He had to figure it out himself. It was hard to say whether he could reach the level of a sackcloth man. The stories and biographies usually said that if there was a treasure, there would be a corresponding cultivation method in the ring. However, the reality was that no one would keep the method of using the ring. It was like a password and a bank card. Only an idiot would keep them together. But why would the biographies write this way? But it was useless. It had been almost 10 years since he entered the path of Tao by catching the white sandworm. In 10 years, he had reached the peak of qi eating. He could be considered outstanding among the individual cultivators, but he could only be ranked below average among the sect disciples. In his current state, even if he used the spirit-gathering formation, he would not improve after a day of cultivation. This was not a bottleneck, but he really could not improve. After 5 years of polishing, the gaseous spiritual power in his body had become crystal clear and pure. All of this had laid a solid foundation for Zhuji. However, how could he take that step? Originally, he had a Zhuji Dan. With his temper, he did not pursue perfection. It did not matter whether he used the ancient method of Zhuji Dan naturally or swallowed the Dan to sense it. As long as he could help his mother, he could extend his life by a few hundred years. Was there a need to be so clear? However, after nearly a month of foot soaking, the medicinal properties of the Zhuji Dan had disappeared. The mist in the Dan had dissipated, and it could not maintain the Dan's effect. Although he knew nothing about Dan, he knew that there was not much medicinal power left in the Dan. Even the outer shell was a little soft. He could not rely on this thing to help him. As for the ancient method of Zhuji Dan naturally, in this situation, he could only hope that the ancestors' graves would smoke and the heavens would bless him. However, there were too many humans. The heavens could not see him, and Lu Sima had no interest in helping him in the dark. After a night of thinking, he finally decided to accompany his mother on her last journey. If during this process, the heavens gave him a chance out of filial piety, then his mother's life was not meant to end. If not, a person of 60 years old was not considered to have a long life in this world. It was not bad to be able to go through life without any danger. Since he had made up his mind, he no longer worried about his gains and losses. Lu Xiaoyi was also very clear that the more he thought about it, the less likely that the so-called opportunity or epiphany would befall him. They did not leave the farm because his mother had come to like the fresh air here. It was isolated from the world and away from the hustle and bustle of the world. She did not have many friends and did not inform anyone, not even her brothers who were far away in Zhaoye. She didn't want anyone to see her weak and powerless appearance. With her son by her side, nothing else mattered. During this period of time in the farm, it was the only time the mother and son spent time together. Lu Xiaoyi did not need to follow etiquette and only needed to attend to matters of the day and night. Lu Xiaoyi did not need to be obsessed with cultivation and only cared about his own matters. They had the happiest memories of this period of time, from all the bad things that happened when Lu Xiaoyi was born to all the experiences that happened when he grew up. They also talked about his father, Lu Sima, Aunt Kai Huan, grandfather, second uncle, third uncle, and other relatives. These memories were originally fragmented in Lu Xiaoyi's mind, like a ball of scattered sand. Under his mother's tireless narration, they gradually became a line, a long river of time. Cultivation did not require one to forget these things, but to pick them up, memorize them, and then carefully store them away. When one was lonely, one could take them out and savor them. In the fields, in the grain-grinding fields, on the small roads in the countryside, on the fragrant grass, Lu Xiaoyi pushed the wooden wheelchair and accompanied his mother to enjoy the gifts of nature. This was the gift of the Creator that they had never paid attention to before. A simple life had simple pleasures. When one's mind was empty and no longer filled with schemes of life and death, when one's mind was filled with flies and dogs, it could contain even more beautiful things in this world. Although this state was destined to not last long, to be able to have such a period of time, it was also a rare experience in life. Some people never had such a state in their entire lives, so they could not understand it. This caused their thoughts to lack a sense of emptiness, and it was also imperceptibly changing some things in the unseen world. Lu Xiaoyi had also tried countless times to improve his mother's body, but it was to no avail. Although there were many things that he did not understand, and he was a newcomer in cultivation who was pacing back and forth at the door, he could faintly feel that a kind of irreversible life force was being lost and returning to heaven and earth. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. His mother's body did not seem to be any different from before the new year, but her mind was sharper. She could see further and think more. That night, after eating very little porridge, Lu Xiaoyi pushed his mother through the fields again. The crickets were singing happily, the stars were dense, and a cool breeze was blowing. The air was rippling with the unique fragrance of the fields. His mother was in a very good mood today. She felt that she needed to ask 2 questions that she had always wanted to ask. If she was any later, she might not have a chance. Xiaoyi, you never ask about your father? I'm very curious. Every boy wants to know what kind of person their father is, but you don't seem to be like that. He left early and you have never seen him. This is pardonable, but I still want to know, do you really not care at all? Lu Xiaoyi was very embarrassed. Mother, maybe I just don't want a strict person to control me? If father was here, I would most likely only be able to study and would not be able to cultivate. I wouldn't be able to help second uncle and the others. Lu Yaosher disagreed. You're wrong. You speak as if studying is useless. If your father was here, your second uncle and the others would not have taken the wrong path. Lu Xiaoyi did not argue. Maybe, but your son is really not cut out for studying. He was not telling the truth. Every boy, in the process of growing up, the first person they would worship would be their father. The first person they would fear would be their father. Even if Lu Sima left early, the height he had reached was enough for boys to worship him. Lu Xiaoyi did not, because he was afraid. Although his memories of his previous life were already blurry, he could vaguely feel that he had a powerful father. He was afraid of this father, even afraid that he would cross time and space to beat him up. Therefore, even if it was purely a feeling, he did not dare to recognize another father. Lu Yaosher did not think too much about it. With her life experience, a father and son were most likely a pair of enemies. When put together, they would not be able to stop. Therefore, she asked the question she wanted to know the most. This was completely a woman's gossip. She had endured for 10 years, and it was really too difficult for her to endure. Xiaoyi, what kind of girls do you like? Weak, dafa, introverted, extroverted, classy, educated, pretty daughters from humble families, virtuous wives. There has to be a type, right? I saw that you and second sisterly have interacted before. It seems like you still like women. Why haven't I seen any movements in this area all these years? Is it because Pooh City is too small and you don't like anyone? Chapter 141. Lu Xiaoyi was even more embarrassed. He had already deceived his mother with the first question. He could not deceive her with the second question. How many more questions could his mother ask? Yes, someone else's. Lu Yaosher was stunned. Her son's answer was far beyond her expectations. Her countless choices were all unreliable. That's right. That second sister, Li, was someone else's. She had countless things she wanted to say, countless reasons she wanted to preach, and countless negative examples she could point out. However, after much thought, she could only come up with one sentence. I see. Our family's little E is truly different from others. All right, since you like her, let's take her. His mother did not speak again. Lu Xiaoyi did not speak again. In tacit agreement, he slowly pushed his mother back to the farmstead. A few of her personal maidservants surrounded her, wanting to carry her to the bed. This was a scene that happened almost every day. As the wheelchair turned, the old woman fell into a deep sleep amidst the fragrance of the soil. Lu Xiaoyi stopped them. You've prepared for so long. Let's begin. According to the night system, when one's parents died, one had to observe the system for a year. It was not forced. In reality, the higher one's status, the more they had to abide by this ancient law. The commoners did not need to. Lu Xiaoyi built a straw hut in front of his mother's grave. In fact, it was also in front of Aunt Kai's grave. They were buried together. He did not have to use this method to show his filial piety. Filial piety was something he had done in front of his mother. There was no need to do it after her death. The reason why he still did it was because he did not have anything important to do. Firstly, it was to observe the system. Secondly, it was for Aunt Kai. Thirdly, he still needed to stay here for a year to properly arrange the servants in Lu Province. This was his mother's wish. He did not want to disappoint her. In addition, he wanted to think about his future here. He did not have much time. He did not have much to squander. There were not many who came to offer condolences, because Lu Xiaoyi did not make a big deal out of it. Only some of the closest servants in the farm were grateful for the old madam's kindness and spontaneously held a low-key and not extravagant funeral. They believed that if the mother knew in the underworld, she would have preferred such a method, and not a group of disloyal people who said beautiful words. The most important part of Lu Province's assets, as well as the most difficult part to deal with, was the Lu Province itself. It was difficult to find a suitable person to take over this piece of land in the city's wealthy district. The person had to have economic strength, social status, and not care about the decline of Lu Province. The nouveau riche didn't want to receive them. The corrupt officials didn't welcome them, and the smelly merchants took a detour. With all these factors, the only result was that no one cared about them. Pingen found him and proposed a new idea. Don't sell Lu Province. Instead, it was transformed into a private garden in the city. No one would live in it, and it would only receive a small number of private visitors. This was something he had learned in the county. He did not want the manor that he had served for decades to fall into the hands of the common people. Some of the expenses came from his own farm. It will be very difficult to do this. It's not a matter of one generation, but several generations. Even if it's just a slow renovation, the investment will be huge. It's not something that your two farms can support. Pingen insisted. If there's a surplus, I'll move a mountain rock. If there's a good harvest, I'll dig a pond. Year after year, when I die, my son will do it, and when my son dies, my grandson will do it. There will be a day when it's done. Lu Xiaoyi was silent. In theory, this was the best way. He was not short of money, so it would be best if he could keep the Lu mansion as a memento. However, doing so would put Ping under great pressure. It was not financial, but after he left, there would be endless covetous eyes from the city's upper class. I have to give it a try. I think that within a few years, with the old madam's grace and the power of Uncle Jai's city, nothing will happen. After that, I can only rely on myself. I want to give it a try. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. He was thinking too much. A mansion could not be brought with him when he was born, could not be taken with him when he died. Even if it was not there, what could it mean if it was burned down? In the worst-case scenario, Pingen would sell the mansion and fill his own pockets. However, since he did not care about the money, why would he think so much? He believed in the feelings of the old people in Lu Province for Lu Province. As for how far they could go, how long they could last, and how long they could last, he might not even be alive in this world. What did it have to do with him? So he took out a pouch. With a wave of his hand, dozens of ingots of gold appeared in front of Pingen. He was shocked. Although he had followed the young master for many years and knew about the young master's miraculous abilities, this was the first time he saw it in action. After teaching Ping and how to use it, Lu Xiaoyi said, "Since you want to do it, I'll support you. This gold is my investment. However, you must remember that this gold is not for you to use to renovate Lu province. After I leave, you will reveal your wealth and seek death. No one can save you." Ping An's personality belonged to the type that was reserved and scheming. He was a bit tenacious. "Young master, Ping An understands. I'll just treat it as if I don't have this gold. I'll earn the funds for the construction of the private gardens based on my own ability. The more I earn, the more I repair. The less I earn, the less I repair. I'm like this, and so are my children and grandchildren." Lu Xiaoyi patted his shoulder. "Ping An, you must understand that you can't rely on your dreams to persist in life. Even if you can do it, you have no reason to ask your children and grandchildren to do the same. They have never done it in Lu province, so why should they devote their lives to it? If you think this way and ask this way, in 3 generations, Lu province will definitely be sold out by your children and grandchildren." Ping An's face turned red, but he did not know how to refute. He knew very well that the young master was not wrong. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. "Just treat it as a business that your children and grandchildren must not give up. A business that all the ancestors of the past generations have invested in. Not only do we need to be able to earn money, we need to be able to maintain contact with the upper echelons of society and obtain protection. We need to make your descendants feel that keeping the Lu residents will be profitable. This is the long-term plan." Ping An was deep in thought. Lu Xiaoyi pointed at the storage bag. "These things are just in case. Every time there's a natural disaster or man-made disaster, and there's no way to deal with it, you can open this bag and use it carefully. When there's a surplus, you can make up for it. This way, it can last for 100 years. After 100 years, it'll all become dung. The dynasty might not even exist, let alone a mere Lu province." A year later, when the time limit was up, he did not inform anyone. He tore down the straw hut and left. From then on, everything in Pu City had come to an end. He had nothing to do with it anymore. More than 7 years had passed since the 10-year promise that the Foundation Establishment Taoist from Zhaoye City mentioned. It was less than 8 years away. If he took into account the distance of Liang country and the difficulty of the journey, he would have to put in another year's time. In other words, he only had a little more than a year's time. If he counted carefully, it would be 15 months. Chapter 142. In 15 months, he could marry a wife and make a baby. He could go to a county to compete for a literary prize. He could run a business and make a lot of money. But for a cultivator, 15 months was not enough. He still set his sights on the Gobi. As he expected, the Red Line Alliance only lasted for a few months before disbanding. It fell apart half a year ago, which led to a large-scale internal strife. No one knew who won or lost. The only thing that was known was that the Gobi became the world of individual cultivators from then on. No one was in charge of an organization anymore. The main reason why they had come to this point was that the red threadworm resources in the center of the Gobi Desert had almost withered, making it unprofitable. Even if they wasted a lot of time and energy, they would not gain much, so it was better to use other methods to obtain resources. There were still cultivators, but they were all at the beginning of the journey of Taoism. For them, the white sandworms were acceptable. The Gobi Desert slowly returned to its usual calmness. Lu Xiaoyi had considered whether or not he should leave the capital and go to the famous mountains to seek inspiration. However, this was not a real world of advanced cultivators. In his few trips, he had mostly seen the mortal world and the mountains and rivers. In terms of spiritual vigor, it was not even as pure as the desolate Gobi Desert. The key was that he did not have much time. He did not have the time to pray for a flash of inspiration while searching. Moreover, such an anxious attitude was not suitable for a journey of Taoism. A real journey of Taoism should be aimless. He should go with the flow and leisurely. He should spend a decade or even a decade to explore the mountains and rivers of this world, not search for something for the sake of it. Therefore, Lu Xiaoyi felt that if he really had a lucky chance, it must still be in the Gobi Desert. It could only be here. He began to wander aimlessly in the Gobi Desert. Sometimes, he would find a place where he could feel something and cultivate for a few days. Then, he would continue to wander. Sometimes, he would fight with cultivators he did not like in the Gobi Desert. However, he did not kill them. Low-level cultivators were no challenge to him. Lu Xiaoyi had also encountered several sandstorms, and one of them was a huge sandstorm that only occurred once in a few decades. This made Lu Xiaoyi very excited. He did his best to run, cultivate, comprehend, and shout in the huge sandstorm. He used all kinds of methods, and some nearby cultivators even thought that he had lost his mind from cultivation. However, he didn't care and continued to do as he pleased. However, the result was embarrassing. After tossing and turning, other than drinking a mouthful of yellow sand, he didn't do anything. The ball of spiritual vigor in his dantian remained the same. It did not move in the slightest, nor did it show any signs of impatience. No matter how hard he tried, how he tried to guide it, or how he hinted at it, it simply ignored him. Still water ripples. When you feel that you need time, time will fly by quickly. When you have nothing to do, time will be as slow as a snail. This is the selectivity of time. Under different moods, the flow of time seems to be different. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. Lu Xiaoyi returned to the Earth Cliff cave that he was most familiar with. He only had 3 months left. In his plan, boarding the flying boat to leave this low-level cultivation world was not his goal, but his last resort, because before that, he needed to do one thing, and that was to seek justice for his mother and Aunt Kai. If he could successfully build his foundation, even if he couldn't stay in this cultivation world because of the Kingslayer, he would still have the opportunity to board the flying boat and leave. This would be the most perfect result. If he couldn't build his foundation, he would still do it. He had waited for 7 years, and he didn't want to wait until they died of old age. However, he wasn't sure if he could succeed. Once he did it, he couldn't leave this cultivation world. He was afraid that he would be a typical case of breaking the relationship between cultivators and mortals. Then, he would be hunted down by the entire cultivation world. He would definitely die. It didn't matter. He just wanted to accompany his mother and Aunt Kai. He didn't care. The gains and losses of life had never been his first consideration. He didn't know where this bad habit came from. Sitting on the cliff, he didn't want to run around anymore. Where could he run to in 3 months? It was better to go to Jiaya City earlier and find out the Emperor's schedule. It was more practical to arrange activities. Sitting here and looking back on his short life, he had gained and lost half. Well, he had stepped into the cultivation world and opened up a new world. Lost, his family had left, and he was alone. From then on, there was no one in this world who really cared about him. He was just a lonely soul who had drifted alone in the universe for so many years that he couldn't even count how long it had been. Therefore, while he was used to being alone, he also especially longed for care. His mother and Aunt Kai gave him this so that he wouldn't be lonely in these 10 years and let his cold heart feel warm and alive again. But he was destined to be lonely. Before, he had wandered in the universe, and after that, he would travel alone. Whether it was in the human world or returning to the state of a lonely soul in the universe, there didn't seem to be much difference. Only these 10 years were the happiest. If everything went well, it might be more than 10 years. Someone had taken away his happy time. Maybe it was a few years, maybe a year, but even if it was only a few days, he couldn't tolerate it. He didn't do it before because his mother was there. He couldn't run around the world without his mother's permission. But now, there was no reason to ignore it. If he didn't do it well, he wouldn't be able to live a normal life, let alone cultivate. He was such a temperamental person. He didn't want to change. Was there any other way? There didn't seem to be. As for how to sense the foundation, this was a problem that had troubled the cultivation world for countless years. It had been like this since the beginning of cultivation. Needless to say, those who could build their foundation were all people with great luck. Then, there was the foundation establishment pill. But even if one swallowed the foundation establishment pill, it didn't mean that the pill clouds would turn into rain. Most cultivators would feel the same as if they had swallowed an ordinary pill with enough nourishment, and there wouldn't be any qualitative changes. You would never know when, where, and how you would build your foundation. There was no way to arrange a definite schedule for this. He thought about the possible situations in his mind again, but there was no other way. He looked through all the items in the storage ring again. There was still a foundation establishment pill left over from the foot soaking. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Mother, if I try using the foot soaking pill, will you bless me in heaven? Just like how you would do every time your son got into trouble? Of course, he knew that this was just a joke. But when you were at the end of your rope, jokes seemed to have value. That pill had been soaked in the foot-soaking water for nearly a month. During this time, Lu Xiaoyi had constantly used the spiritual opportunity to stimulate the medicinal efficacy. How much medicinal efficacy was left? 20%? 10%? This was probably a lot. There was only one possibility, and that was that it was a complete waste pill. The key point was that this thing couldn't be divided into several parts. Its effect was in the whole. Even if it was missing 10%, it would still be a waste pill in the shop. Its value would be greatly reduced, and only the value of the cost would be left. Lu Xiaoyi wasn't treating a dead horse as a living horse. He was just using this method to remember his deceased relatives. Mother's foot-soaking pill, what was the point of keeping it? Eat it. It was eternal. At this time, the moon was bright and the stars were sparse. The desert was quiet and the breeze didn't blow. Looking from afar, the big and small sandbags and sand dunes were like giant sleeping beasts, hibernating in the dusk. Lu Xiaoyi sat cross-legged in the spirit-gathering formation. His body was upright, and his hands were flat, holding the foot-soaking pill. He saluted the moon and teased. To victory! Chapter 143. Raising his neck and opening his mouth, he swallowed it down, yet there was no expectation in his heart. It was like eating a persimmon. It was soft, but not sweet enough. As expected, nothing abnormal occurred, but he didn't feel the slightest bit of disappointment. He was calm without a ripple. He was reflecting on his life. If he missed out on tonight, he wouldn't be as calm as he was now when he set foot on his journey tomorrow. Past life? It seemed to be very important, but he had already forgotten. He couldn't even remember when he started to forget, as if he had always existed in a process of unceasing forgetting. He could still remember that world, the skyscrapers, airplanes, cannons, the world structure, and the direction of the country, but he couldn't find his position in it. Was it a public office? A soldier? Was it a family of 9 to 5 workers? In any case, it was a failure. Apart from this, he didn't remember anything about himself. It was like he was an existence like air in that world. He knew there was definitely some problem in this. The universe? There was nothing to remember. It was eternal and unchanging, silent forever. 10,000 years was an instant, and an instant was 10,000 years. This world? This was the only thing he could remember. Over a dozen years of dribs and drabs had allowed him to become a person again. A person's joys and sorrows of separation and reunion. Then, in the midst of these recollections, he felt the first drop of rain fall from the cloud of vitality in his dantian. Perhaps it was a teardrop. How many tens of thousands of years had it been since he had shed a tear? Lu Xiaoyi indulged his heart, and tears streamed down. In contrast, the tears in his dantian became more and more concentrated. The threads were like threads, gradually pouring down. Mother, are you helping me? Once the heavy rain in his dantian began, it didn't stop. The cloud layer gradually thinned, and his dantian transformed from a pool of water into a spring. Lu Xiaoyi didn't place any restrictions on this, nor did he interfere with this process of vaporization and liquefaction. This was because Tao Foundation establishment was heaven's work. It was good to see, good to feel, and good to be happy. Thankfully, this rain didn't become a sun shower. Half of it was clouds, and the other half was water. After a quarter of an hour, the gaseous cloud completely dispersed, and there wasn't a trace of rain or cloud above his dantian. Yet below his dantian, a spring glowing with spiritual light was actively flowing, brimming with boundless vitality. Foundation establishment still wasn't over. Although the most crucial moment had passed, there was still a very important ending. That is, the spiritual power in the body's meridians is still in a gaseous state. It needs to be circulated, completely changing it into a liquid state. This was a painful process because along with the transformation of spiritual energy in the meridians, the body was also reconstructed. The main body was in the meridians, but it also involved the internal organs, blood, bones, muscles, skin. Lu Xiaoyi made a prompt decision. He threw all the spirit stones he had, as well as several hundred spirit stones, into the spirit gathering array beside him. He didn't care that such extravagance and waste would be inefficient. What he needed the most now was to replenish high-intensity spirit energy in a short period of time. There was no time to waste. After the Taoist root in the pubic region is formed, the time window for it to dissolve in a liquid is very short. If he doesn't temper his body now, he won't have another chance in the future. He will become another kind of half-finished, laying foundation cultivator. To have the ability to build one's foundation, but not have the body to build one's foundation, that was a useless foundation. At such a crucial moment, the Jade Clear's imperial edict from the Orthodox Taoism displayed the supreme ability of the three Clear's martial arts. It could transform the body to the greatest extent, but it wouldn't cause the cultivator to be unable to withstand the pain and lose consciousness during the process. How could Lu Xiaoyi be stopped by mere pain? A mother's love gave him a chance, just like how she gave him life when he was still in the womb. The martial arts circulated faster and faster. The gaseous spiritual energy in the various meridians in the body was instantly condensed into a liquid state by the time it reached the pubic region, and then returned to the various meridians. His internal organs were moving, his bones were being densified, his blood was being renewed, his muscles were being stretched, and his skin was being tightened. No matter how strong a normal person was, they wouldn't be able to withstand such a huge change. Unless they were like Lu Xiaoyi, who had been working hard on his small Tao body for many years. All of his efforts were for today's gains. Cultivation was never something that could be solved with a flash of inspiration. He only used 15 minutes to liquefy his pubic region, but it took him a whole 2 hours to change his body. Only now did he realize that his breakthrough was a little rash. Acting rashly without the protection of his elders and fellow sect members, as long as a cultivator with evil intentions passed by, it would make his 10 years of effort go down the drain. There was no black mud seeping out from his body, which meant that the person who said this definitely hadn't built his foundation. This was the Tao foundation. It wasn't like he hadn't bathed for a few years. How unimaginative would one have to be to think of rubbing out black mud from his body? Just by breathing in and out, he spat out mouthfuls of foul air. The more he breathed out, the faster he breathed out, and the thicker he breathed out. It didn't dissipate for a long time. When his body was completely renewed, Lu Xiaoyi suddenly realized that his cross-legged body was no longer sitting on the ground. Instead, it was floating in the air by half a foot, not touching the ground. He could fly now. However, he could only fly for a short period of time because this required arcane effort, secret arts, skill, and magic artifacts. But right now, he had none of these. He didn't have everything he had after entering Foundation establishment. Originally, he would have obtained this after entering some hidden sect. A chi-consuming cultivator looking for a thigh and a Foundation establishment cultivator looking for a backer were two different concepts. The former was absolutely impossible, and the latter was a matter of course. No sect or power would dislike having too many Foundation establishment cultivators. However, he might not have the time. When the transformation of his body finished, Lu Xiaoyi straightened his body and stood up. His state of mind was suddenly enlightened. He suddenly thought that according to procedure, shouldn't he howl now? Howl! A long howl spread far and wide in the darkness of the desert. Following that, the sandwolves far and near howled back in response, rising and falling in succession. It was a magnificent sight. Lu Xiaoyi laughed heartily. Next, it was time to compose a poem. This was a deep-rooted feeling in his mind. He didn't know where this feeling came from or who it was influenced by. It was precisely, a loving mother shines a mirror on his dantian. The auspicious clouds of his 5 viscera reached the heavens. Before, when he was silent, he was only lacking mercury and lead in his chest. Mercury and lead, the so-called cornerstone of Taoism, he no longer owed them now. Before entering Foundation establishment, he planned to embark on the path of illuminating the night as soon as dawn broke. But now, the situation had changed. If he planned carefully, he might not lose his life there, so he could consolidate for a period of time. Now that he was sensing the body of Foundation establishment, the speed was incomparable to before. The 1-year journey he originally thought of was not so long now. However, as soon as he consolidated, a problem arose. For a qi-consuming cultivator, the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth was already very thin. For him, whose dantian was now liquid, it was almost indistinct. Thus, he simply abandoned the spirit-gathering formation and directly used the hundreds of spirit stones in a half-spirit state. At least he could still feel a sense of fullness. This also made him realize that the state of a loose cultivator was no longer enough to maintain his cultivation. In terms of resources, there was simply no way to continue, even if he had the endless red threadworms. There were only 2 paths: enter a sect or go to a new cultivation world. Chapter 144. If his mother was still alive, he would have chosen the former without hesitation. However, now that his family was gone, and he had to go to Jia, the cultivation world was no longer suitable for him. He had to go somewhere far away. He did not have any foundation building skills, not even one. Due to the lack of time, he could not buy any skills and practice them before he went to Zhaoye. It was less than 2 years before the Liang King's appointment at the top of the mountain. Therefore, the only way was to strengthen what he was best at. What was he best at now? It was not the skills that he had been longing for, but the ability to wield a sword and control objects at close range. Therefore, he could only put some effort in this aspect. If he really met a foundation-building cultivator, his long-range skills would not work, so he would try to fight in close range. This was the essence of asymmetrical fighting. It was also the most suitable fighting direction he could think of for now. After more than 2 months, all the spiritual stones were used up. His state had been completely stabilized. Most importantly, in the 2 months of practice, he was completely familiar with his current body. He would not lose control of his strength and strength. Cultivators were only in the upper realm. In fact, there was a limit to the growth of combat power. The biggest limiting factor was that they were not familiar with their own potential. How much strength did it take to cross 10 feet? How much strength did it take to cross 10 feet was completely different now. How to control the distribution of strength when throwing a punch was a big problem. He had solved this problem in the past 2 months. If he could fully exert his strength, he would have achieved his goal. From now on, there was still 1 year before the appointment at the top of the mountain. It was time to leave. Lu Xiaoyi sneaked into Lu province under the cover of night. There was no one else here except for a few watchmen. It was lifeless and lifeless. He searched for some old things in the warehouse and left without leaving a trace. In his mind, this might be the last time he came back here in his life. It would be difficult for him to come back here in the future. Zhaoye City. Since the new emperor ascended the throne, it had become more and more prosperous. It was a scene of prosperity. In the morning, the Yao family's mansion in the good political square was still solemn and dignified. However, this was only for the common folk. Those who truly understood the matters of the imperial court all knew that the Yao residence was no longer as glorious as before. Ever since the day of the 4th prince's ascension to the throne, General Funwei had escaped from death. Although he did not receive any punishment on the surface, he had already lost the emperor's favor and his life was getting worse by the day. The emperor only remembered the promise he had made on the day of his ascension to the throne, so he did not make things difficult for the Yao family. However, as long as General Fenway died, it would be hard to say what would happen next. Inheriting the title of general? Don't even think about it. It was already very difficult for them to not have their entire family confiscated and exterminated. In the imperial court, it was easy to get up but difficult to get down. Which one of the reigning officials did not have a pile of mess buried behind their buttocks? If you are in a high position, you can suppress it. When you fall, even if the emperor doesn't punish you, there will still be people who try to figure out the emperor's intentions and plot against you. Since ancient times, this had never happened. But what made people speechless was that in this world where the average lifespan was less than 60 years old, the Yao family's ferocious General Yao II, who had long passed 60 years old, was still able to hold on and not die. This was also a miracle that was neither too big nor too small. As long as he didn't die, the Yao family wouldn't fall. This made people speechless. However, the new emperor was only 40 years old, so Yao II wouldn't be able to hold on. There was no use in struggling. This was everyone's consensus. Today was the day of the Imperial Court Assembly. So when the sky just started to brighten, Second Master Yao began to put on his court attire with the help of the servants. Regardless of whether it was his mental or physical state, he wasn't in a good state. However, he still held on and didn't fall. The people in the Imperial Court were already used to it. The ferocious general was in idle position and didn't have any specific duties, so he didn't need to attend the small Imperial Court Assembly. However, the Imperial Court Assembly that was held once a month was something that every noble would attend. This was especially so for Second Master Yao. It was an important occasion to announce that he was still alive, so he had to crawl even if he had to crawl. The safety of the entire Yao family rested on his shoulders. Ever since his younger sister left, the two of them who had been quarreling their entire lives were separated forever. Second Master Yao aged faster and faster. When he was young, his eldest brother died. In the past few years, his third brother and his younger sister died. In this generation, he was the only one left. In his eyes, there wasn't much vitality left. It was as if he was a walking corpse. However, even if he was a walking corpse, he would still insist on walking. He couldn't let others feel comfortable watching him. Sitting in the sedan chair, he swayed all the way out of Yao family's residence. If it was a few years ago, he would ride a horse to announce his health. Now, he really couldn't do that. Early in the morning, Jiaya City was very quiet because it was a famous city that never slept. Most people would sleep peacefully at home after a night of indulgence, except for those at the bottom who had to work hard to make a living. However, the officials who went to the Imperial Court Assembly in the morning were always a beautiful sight in Jiaya City. They gathered in the Imperial City from all directions, especially those who came from Shanzhongfang. No one talked or greeted them. They all took the time to take a nap in the sedan chair. The Imperial Court Assembly was not only a mental task, but also a physical one. After passing through the surging Gold Gate, one could be considered to have truly entered the boundaries of the Imperial City. Imperial guards were everywhere, with a sentry every 3 steps and a sentry every 5 steps. The officials would also disembark from their palanquins here. For the rest of the journey, they would have to walk in, regardless of their age or health. Only a few of the most powerful officials, old officials who were most valued by the emperor, would have their palanquins carried in by eunuchs. Unlike the others, Second Master Yao didn't sleep much. He had been looking at the scenery of the Imperial City. It was not that he had any sentimental feelings about it, but he knew that every time he looked at it, it would be his last time. Therefore, he was extra attentive. When he was serious, he noticed a strange phenomenon. A sedan chair landed in the distance. A middle-aged official stepped out of the sedan chair, yawning. He stomped his feet and rubbed his eyes. When he came out from the back of the sedan chair, there were 2 officials, one in front and one behind. The one walking behind was obviously not the one who got off the sedan chair before. He seemed younger and his back looked familiar. However, he didn't have the chance to confirm it. He didn't know the middle-aged official who got off the sedan chair before. He couldn't catch up with the other official who seemed to come out of the ground. He could only watch the 2 disappear into the crowd. There were hundreds of officials in the imperial court assembly. How could he have the chance to get to know these new officials? Second Master Yao didn't really take it to heart. He was no longer that powerful and devout general, nor did he have such a strong sense of responsibility. To enter the Golden Imperial Palace, he still had to go through several thresholds. There were imperial guards guarding the palace, and they were expert from the most mysterious government office in the past that dealt with cultivators. How could anyone with ulterior motives be able to sneak in? He resisted the lack of physical strength and moved step by step toward the Golden Imperial Palace. No one came to help him. They were all afraid of getting hurt. If there was nothing wrong, they were afraid that the emperor would blame them. If there was something wrong, they couldn't explain it clearly. Chapter 145. After an hour, he finally made it to the throne room. Standing in his familiar position, he felt sad and worried about how he was going to go back. Recently, his body had become more and more unbearable. The light in the hall was dim, and all the lights would be lit up before the emperor went to court. Therefore, he did not care who was standing in front of him or beside him, just like how others did not care about him. Here, he was just a symbol. But even if he was a symbol, he had to stand out and show it, right? Almost all of the officials had arrived. After another hour, the servants lit up the hundreds of lamps in the hall. Only then did the throne room show its proper grandeur. Everyone was silent and lowered their heads. There was no complicated etiquette in the Kingdom of Darkness, so there was no need to kneel 3 times and cow down 9 times. But at least they had to know the basic rules. With guards opening the way and eunuchs in charge, a group of people approached from the back of the throne room. Then, a row of more than a dozen palace guards stood at the bottom of the steps. The emperor ascended the throne under the care of 2 eunuchs holding fans. Although there were hundreds of people in the throne room, they were in good order and the guards were especially tight. Under the dragon throne, there were more than a dozen palace guards. Behind the ministers, under each pillar, there were several generals of the throne room. There were more than 100 people. Of course, the so-called generals here were just a title. They were actually warriors, so it sounded nice to call them generals. These were the ones inside the hall. There were countless outside, each with their own responsibilities. As long as there was any movement in the hall, they would swarm over with an order. The eunuchs were holding a scroll and reading from it. It was nothing more than the mountains and rivers were peaceful, the people were rich, and if there was something, report it early. If there was nothing, withdraw from court, and so on. The older officials had heard this for decades. No one would interrupt or move at this time. When this period was over, it would be much easier to enter the court debate. Second Old Master Yao was the one who heard this the most in the hall. He was the most loyal lackey, but also the most useless one. Eyes down, nose down, eyebrows down, this was Second Master Yao's current state. However, this didn't mean that he didn't know anything. He didn't dare to say that he was alert in all directions, but almost any movement in the main hall couldn't escape his attention. This was the basic skill of every official present. Suddenly, he felt that someone was moving. A figure flashed past in front of him, followed by a cry of surprise and a low reprimand from the Golden Palace General. Second Master Yao abruptly raised his head, only to see a figure pouncing straight for the dragon throne. Looking at that figure, it was actually that strange figure he had seen at the Surging Gold Gate. Dressed in the court attire of a 5th-rank official, he belonged to the lowest rank among the several hundred imperial court officials. The figure was very fast, but the reaction of the guards in front of the Dragon Emperor was not slow either. An alarm bell that shook the Golden Palace rang, and several guards rushed forward, while the other guards carried the Emperor and retreated quickly, intending to leave this dangerous place. In an instant, the Golden Palace Hall was in a mess. Some screamed and hid, some panicked and didn't know what to do, some spoke up for justice and attacked the unruly person, and there were also opportunists who gambled on glory and wealth. Of course, there were also the Golden Palace generals who were pushing and shoving each other as they rushed towards the Dragon Throne. Second Master Yao's spirit was lifted. This was a great opportunity to show his loyalty. Thus, He took a step forward and shouted sternly, "General Finway is here. Who dares to offend the Emperor? Bring my blade." In the next moment, he was knocked to the ground. The Golden Palace generals and the imperial court officials collided, causing a complete mess. The ones who were knocked over were all brain workers. At this critical moment, the Golden Palace generals couldn't care less about these people who might be old and weak. However, this was only the periphery. With the assassin's speed, the Golden Palace generals couldn't make it in time. 5 palace guards rushed towards the assassin. The assassin was a young imperial court official. At least, he was an assassin wearing an imperial court official's uniform. They only had short blades in their hands. It was impossible for them to carry a green dragon crescent blade, even when they were serving the Emperor. These people's weapon skills were secondary, but their wrestling skills were very impressive. This was because among the palace guards, killing the opponent was not the most important thing. Both sides waved their weapons and jumped onto roofs and walls to fight. This was not in line with the principles of the palace guards at all. For them, the principle was to lock down the assassin at the first moment. They were wearing soft armor, and their short blades were also used for blocking. As long as they were close to the assassin, they would immediately be tripped. They would lift their feet to lock the assassin's head and twist their arms to press the assassin's body, even if they were injured for this reason. For them, in such a narrow space, and they could clearly determine the direction of the assassin's advance, locking down the assassin was a very easy thing to do. However, all their countermeasures were based on the premise that the assassin was a mortal martial artist. If the assassin was a cultivator, then their countermeasures would be greatly reduced. If the assassin was a real cultivator who had built the Taoist foundation, then all their actions would be meaningless, just like now. Even if they had reached out to the assassin, they would still be knocked away without any suspense. They had no ability to fight back. The assassin wore a 5th-level official's robe, but this official's robe didn't affect his movements. After knocking aside the 5 palace guards that came forward, with another step, he had already arrived behind the Emperor's group. There were still 6 or 7 guards left. Except for 2 who were carrying the Emperor and running away, the others all turned back and rushed towards the assassin loyally. This time, they drew their weapons without mercy because they had realized something. As long as they could delay the Emperor for a moment, a large number of Imperial guards outside would surround him. There were hundreds and thousands of them. No matter how powerful this cultivator was, he could stop the Emperor for a while. Moreover, the state preceptor would come as soon as possible. However, their efforts were to no avail. The assassin, dressed as a young official, did not make any unnecessary movements. He only charged forward, ignoring the weapons on his body. When these sharp weapons came into contact with his body, it was as if they had collided with an invisible wall of air. He grabbed the Emperor's neck and waved his hand to send 2 guards who were struggling nearby, flying away. The assassin turned back and smiled coldly. "If you act rashly again, I'll use your most honorable Emperor as a shield." At this moment, the situation was hopeless. No one dared to use their weapons for fear of accidentally hurting the Emperor. The assassin didn't hurt the Emperor. Instead, he carried the Emperor and walked out. A large group of guards and warriors formed a large circle, tightly surrounding him and moving out together. Outside the Golden Imperial Palace, there was a wide square paved with thick jade, but there was not a single tree. This was a standard feature of all the palaces for fear of assassins hiding here. However, under the scorching summer sun, there was a big disadvantage, which was the unbearable heat. The assassin carried the Emperor to the center of the square. He reached out and broke one of the Emperor's fingers, shouting, "Let them all back off." Chapter 146. Under the immense pain, the Emperor had no other choice. He knew that this was a cultivator and that only a cultivator could deal with him. These ordinary soldiers could not do anything to him. In order to stall for time and prevent him from attacking in a rage, they could only order the guards and warriors to retreat until they were dozens of feet away from the Emperor. They still formed a large circle, but there was no real meaning to it. The court officials also rushed out, but they were not allowed to enter the plaza. They could only gather on the high platform outside the throne room. This was to protect them from being injured in the chaos. However, the view from this position was very good. Every movement in the plaza could be seen clearly. Second Master Yao was also squeezed into the crowd. The fall just now had not been light. Even now, his bones were aching. From afar, the assassin was slowly taking off his fifth-rank official robe. However, what surprised everyone was that he was still wearing an official robe. Second Master Yao's entire body trembled. Although his vision was a bit blurry due to old age and his position wasn't right, he couldn't clearly see the assassin's face. However, that familiar figure and the equally familiar official's robes caused him to be distraught. Under the scorching summer sun, a wave of coldness rose out of nowhere. From inside to outside, it made him unable to breathe. The official robe inside was the robe of Sima Yi, one of the highest officials in the country. Although it was somewhat old and the color was no longer bright, the embroidered bee style clearly told everyone the answer. This was the robe of Sima Yi from the previous dynasty. Lu Xiaoyi was refined and courteous. My surname is Lu. Today, I came here to settle an old debt with His Majesty. I don't need to say much. You should understand. 2 hours, right here. If you survive, you're lucky. If you don't survive, you can only blame yourself. It's not too much. With a press of his hand, the Tin Emperor knelt straight on the hot jade stone under the summer sun, unable to struggle even a single step. Although his voice was not loud, each word was clear. It reached the ears of the thousands of people in the plaza and the throne room. Everything was clear now. Although not everyone was clear about the matter of the coronation 8 years ago, everyone present knew the origin of this grudge through word of mouth. Everyone couldn't help but sigh. They all thought that the Liu clan's glory was gone, but who knew that the descendants of the Liu clan would use such a method to resolve the karma? At that time, there were actually many officials who did not quite agree with the emperor's actions. A widow and an orphan, do you really have to do this? Now, retribution had come, and it was obvious that there was no way he would let this go. Many people turned their gazes towards second Old Master Yao, and the old man shrugged. Do you think I can persuade a cultivator? Even if he is my nephew? He could see very clearly that the Liu clan was finished. The Yao clan was also finished. Regardless of the outcome, the destruction of the clan was certain. There was no chance of escaping death. Since that was the case, why should he go up and beg bitterly and become a laughingstock? He already had a premonition about Yao Shi's ending. It would happen sooner or later, but to end it in this way, at least he could leave behind a reputation, even if it was the reputation of killing the ruler. Not bad. 3 figures flew over. They were the state preceptor of this generation and his 2 senior and junior brothers. Although their status in the country was extraordinary, they were too lazy to participate in such a boring gathering as the Imperial Court Assembly. It was a waste of time. Therefore, they were not present when the incident happened. Now that they had rushed over, they originally thought that this was a daring, chi-eating rogue cultivator and that they would be able to take him down with a few tricks. But when they got closer, they gasped. Lu Xiaoyi didn't hide the aura of his upper foundation establishment cultivation. This left the disciples of the 3 sects at a loss for what to do. It was impossible to use force, so they could only see if they could resolve the situation. The state preceptor had his 2 fellow disciples wait on the spot, while he went up alone, afraid of causing a misunderstanding. Esteemed Master, ZG of the giant Lu sect greets you. He was very respectful, and Lu Xiaoyi returned the greeting. He was not respectful towards him, but towards a giant Lu sect behind him. Esteemed Master, in the Night Reflection Realm, the cultivation world and the Imperial Court have an agreement to not interfere with each other. Esteemed Master's actions today have violated the agreement. If someone's life were to be lost, I'm afraid that even with my status as Esteemed Master, it would be difficult to explain. As the state preceptor, this disciple promises Esteemed Master that if Tianda Emperor is released, I will give esteemed master and my family a perfect explanation. This is the promise of the cultivation world to esteemed master. We will not go back on our words. Lu Xiaoyi took a deep breath and slowly exhaled before saying calmly. He said calmly, "The premise of the agreement is not to interfere with each other. This person consecutively killed my adoptive mother and birth mother. Do you think that as a son, I will give up karma because of some agreement?" Dao Ziji was speechless. This foundation establishment, esteemed master's words had blocked all his communication. Cultivators sought immortality and freedom. So, of course, they had to pursue a clear mind and end karma. There was no choice but to avenge his mother's death. Letting him go was the same. With his current level, he could not stop this esteemed master. If he returned to the sect to call for reinforcements, it would take several days for reinforcements to arrive. Thus, he was powerless against Tianda Emperor. This was not his fault. His sect would not ask him to become enemies with a foundation establishment cultivator for the sake of an emperor. The highest cultivation level in his giant Lu sect was only at the late stage of the foundation establishment realm. If he rashly made a move, it might cause a conflict between the sections. It was not worth it for a mortal emperor. Thus, he straightforwardly said, "This disciple will immediately return to the sect and wait for instructions. Please forgive me, esteemed master. However, this situation, I wonder what esteemed master has to teach me." Lu Xiaoyi pointed out, "I heard that the Shining Night Kingdom has a second prince?" Dao Ziji was speechless. This esteemed master meant that he could not spare Tianda Emperor's life today. To him, even if he could not save Tianda Emperor, he had to at least maintain the peace of the Shining Night Kingdom. This was his duty. Thus, he wanted to make arrangements. He notified his sect and the second emperor to come and preside over the situation. This was a tacit understanding between cultivators. They would not support Tianda Emperor's prince. Not only was it because he was too young, but it was also because if they allowed his son to ascend the throne, the mortal world might retaliate on a larger scale. As for brothers, under the scorching sun, the heat wave was suffocating. In less than an hour, Tianda Emperor was already on the verge of collapse. However, Lu Xiaoyi did not have the slightest intention of hiding. In theory, it was Lu Sima who started this method of punishment. However, the situation at that time was that there was water and an umbrella, as well as a halftime break. It was not designed to kill. This method was fundamentally different from Tianda Emperor's method. Lu Xiaoyi would not consider the complicated cause and effect of this. He had never seen his father, Lu Sima, but the death of Aunt Kai and the death of his mother had happened in front of his eyes. There was no room for negotiation. The ministers were not all waiting. Some of the smarter ones among them also thought of a way, and that was to gamble. They gambled that the Lu family son would not really kill the emperor. They would charge forward with a large number of troops and see if his cultivator dared to kill a large number of mortals. This was using the lives of soldiers to destroy the future of cultivators. How imaginative! However, the ministers were not united in their opinions because there was always a so-called conservative faction. Even if they knew that the emperor was doomed, they did not want to leave a name in history that they were the ones who sent troops to kill the emperor. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.